Chapter 398. The officers were originally silent and indifferent, but when they heard the words His Majesty, it was as if they were struck by an electric current. With a whoosh, all of them stood up and performed a military salute in unison, shouting loudly, "Long live His Majesty!" His voice echoed in the empty command room and did not disappear for a long time. The officers, who had been tortured by years of war and homesickness, were about to go crazy. Even if they were not really excited, in front of their colleagues, their faces were still red. It seemed that if they did not do this, they would not be able to show their fanatical loyalty to His Majesty. Unfortunately, one of the officers could not hold back his coughing, and the continuous coughing slightly diluted the fanaticism in the room. "Norman, if you're sick, just rest. Those things will naturally be taken care of by the ground forces. If it really doesn't work, those few pitiful warships in space can still chase after them." After the officers sat down, the old general looked gently at the coughing officer and said this. But from the corner of his eyes, he noticed that the officers under him had returned to their previous numb expressions. The Federation soldiers in the South dreamed every day of reconstructing the glory of the Charter in the Northern Hemisphere, sending out satellites and electronic surveillance equipment regardless of the cost. The Imperial Expeditionary Force in the Northern Hemisphere fought every day, and the two sides seemed to have formed some kind of tacit agreement. Every time at a fixed time they would put on a show of air guns and air balloons. The old general did not blame the numbness of the officers under him. No matter who it was, to stay on a planet so far away from home for so many years, fighting a war that was not tragic but particularly lingering every day, they could only gradually fall into a state of boredom. "I'm fine." The officer called Norman had the most common surname in the Empire. He coughed twice, walked in front of the old general, and said, "General, the clearing of the forest today is a little slow. Should we send out the backup mecha battalion? To prevent the Federation from reconstructing the glory of the Charter, other than the spacecrafts and satellites in space, what was more troublesome for the Imperial Expeditionary Force was the small automatic electronic surveillance equipment that the enemy used the large transport aircraft to spread in the forest. Although they could find and destroy these annoying little things through frequency detection, there were too many of them. 3 mecha squadrons were needed to clear them out every day. Do as you see fit. If we don't clean up, we won't be able to sleep peacefully." The old general smiled gently. The computer system in the command room suddenly beeped. An officer quickly walked over and submitted an enemy intelligence report. According to the electronic surveillance, 11 minutes ago, a light warship under the escort of a federal fleet landed at Zichio Airport in the Southern Hemisphere. The old general put on his spectacles, which had been badly worn out, and read carefully for a while. Then, he shook his head and said with a smile, "Which big shot of the Federation do you think is in this warship?" "I can't guess, but it shouldn't be their reinforcements." The Norman officer shook his head. "You should pay more attention to the Federation's news, even though their language is a bit difficult to learn." The old general smiled and said, "The one who came today should be their national girl. I didn't expect that the venue of the concert would be here." The old general said, "That's not important, but there has been a lot of activity in the South recently. They should be sending more troops." A hint of vigilance flashed through the pale blue eyes of the Norman officer as he asked, "What should we do?" The old general smiled and said, "We won't do anything." This circular defense base was the largest military base of the Imperial Expeditionary Force on Planet 5460. The headquarters of the Maplewoods Alliance was located here. In the Empire's military system, the Alliance had 5 brigades under it. Its military strength was basically equivalent to an army of the Federation. As for special wartime equipment like the Expeditionary Force, it had more people. The old general who had just walked out of the command room and was walking toward the edge of the forest with the accompaniment of an orderly was none other than the commander of the Imperial Expeditionary Force's Maplewoods Alliance, Lieutenant General Ambley. This was the northern hemisphere of the planet, close to the glaciers that had only slightly melted once every 3,000 years. Although the base was at the edge of the forest, it was still cold, and most of the trees were coniferous. It had snowed last night, making it extremely difficult to walk. Ambly refused the help of the orderlies and walked with great difficulty, one step at a time. As one of the most important military leaders of the Imperial Expeditionary Force, he knew very well that the Federation was preparing for a major operation. In the past few months, the frequency of warships taking off and landing in the Southern Federation base was clearly much higher than before. However, this general was as stable as a snowy mountain and did not intend to do anything. With the current situation of the Expeditionary Force, he could not do anything. The Expeditionary Force's auxiliary space fleet could at most defend the northern skies, but they could not stop the enemy's reinforcements. In fact, if it were not for the fact that the Federation was already lacking in crystal resources, this old general really could not imagine how many days his lone army could last under the continuous bombardment of the Federal fleet's main cannons. If it weren't for the fact that the Imperial instructors used the dry and isolated environment to thoroughly educate the Expeditionary Force officers and soldiers to be patriotic, the Expeditionary Force in the last 3 star systems would have probably surrendered to the Federation long ago. I wonder what the maple forest of my hometown looks like now. The standards of the Federation and the Empire are about the same. The 2 rows of maple trees behind the room should have grown by now. The old general took off his gloves and lightly patted the Federation's winter trees. Thinking about the red leaves of his homeland, a hint of warmth appeared on his aged face. However, he knew that he would probably never be able to go back in this lifetime, and he would never be able to see the red leaves of his hometown again, unless what those idiots in the military said was true. Let's go. The old general turned around and walked towards the direction of the base, but he saw an injured rabbit struggling beside the snow. He smiled and said, "The animals of the Federation are very fortunate. They were raised by them for so many years, but now they are all eaten by us." The orderlies behind him couldn't help but rub their heads and laugh. The Empire had long grasped the technology to extract hydrogen energy. Relying on the iceberg behind them was equivalent to relying on a huge energy warehouse. That was why the Empire's fleet was able to put most of its transport capacity into the supply of soldiers and supplies. Otherwise, relying on the few protein meat production bases of the Expeditionary Force would definitely not be able to satisfy the needs of so many troops. What made the soldiers of the Imperial Expeditionary Force the most excited was that this planet was actually filled with countless wild animals. Although they couldn't be used as rations, it was still a wonderful thing to occasionally have a sumptuous meal. On the way back to the base, General Ambly encountered a group of sentinels. This group of sentinels was supported by 3 moon mechas. They had just captured a Federation scout in the forest. In the current era of modern warfare, scouts were very rarely used. Even if the charter network in the Northern Hemisphere was completely destroyed, the Federal Army would rarely send scouts unless it was to confirm some extremely important information. Only when the Military Intelligence Department didn't dare to completely trust the surveillance equipment would they send scouts to take the risk. The Federation scout had delicate facial features and didn't look very old. When he saw Ambly's military uniform, he instantly knew his identity. He opened his mouth and hurriedly said a few words in pure Empire language. Ambly listened quietly for a moment and exchanged a few words with the officer who had finished interrogating him. He smiled at the Federation scout and said, "We have never taken any prisoners between us. You should know that we, the Empire, don't have any extra food." A look of perseverance flashed across the face of the Federation scout. He forced himself to stand up from the ground, but before he could completely stand up, a gunshot rang out. Blood spurted out of his head, and he fell forward heavily into the snow. General Ambly didn't even look at this common scene. He had already walked forward and asked the orderlies beside him with a smile, "What do we eat tonight? I think that rabbit just now was pretty good." Before he entered the base, the old man's dark brown eyes flashed with a trace of coldness. This was because he noticed that the Norman officer and many people in the command room had walked out of the base. They seemed to be waiting for him. Emergency military report. The Norman officer handed over a top-secret electronic document. General Ambley glanced at it. His expression was extremely gloomy. The old fingers holding the electronic document trembled slightly. He said in a low voice, "When did the military have the right to give orders to the expeditionary forces specific military operations? A bunch of idiots." The Norman officer had already forgotten to cough. He said in shock and helplessness, "This is His Majesty's order." Chapter 399. There were two space tunnels between the Federation and the Empire. They were located at the outer edge of the Night Scorpion Nebula and the Gary Corridor. Many years ago, when the Federation was increasing its efforts to develop the West Woods, the Bureau of Proclamation accidentally discovered these two warp holes. After a long period of calculation by the central computer, people deduced that the exits of these two warp holes should be in the left sky galaxy. For the Federation, which was expanding its territory step by step in an orderly manner, the left sky galaxy was a distant and unfamiliar world. Even with the most advanced exploration spaceship of the Federation, it would take a full 4 years to reach that place. In fact, countless exploration spaceships had been launched by humans to that world, but all of them eventually disappeared without a trace. They had never returned any useful information. This vast sea of stars was filled with countless dangers. The process of humans conquering the universe seemed to be magnificent, but in reality, the number of galaxies that they could come into contact with was still pitifully small. At this time, when they suddenly discovered that they could reach the distant left sky galaxy through these two space tunnels, the entire Federation fell into an uproar. Relying on the amazing computing power of the Federal Central Computer, countless generations of space scientists of the Federal Academy of Science had spent hundreds of years to successfully calculate all the data of these two space tunnels. The annihilation curvature of the three-dimensional warp and the turbulent period of the violent cosmic ray turbulence in the tunnels were all mapped out. With this precious data of the space tunnels, in addition to the countless years of experience the Federation had in using the warp holes, a fleet that carried the ambition of the Federation to explore the universe slowly entered the space tunnels under the protection of the Army. Then, the Federation was shocked to discover that at the other end of the tunnel, the left sky galaxy, which they thought to be barren, already had a civilization that had developed to its current level. That civilization did not welcome their arrival and was extremely warlike and brutal since the first dangerous contact in the last few years of the 36 constitutional calendar. The Federation had firmly controlled the control of the space channel between the Night Scorpion Nebula and the Gary Corridor. Before the Imperium could calculate the data of the space channel, it could never organize a large invasion fleet to break through the Night Scorpion Nebula, which was full of stars and gravitational fields, and the Gary Corridor, which was full of violent ray turbulence. Therefore, the expedition army sent by the violent Imperium could only detour around the Night Scorpion Nebula and spend 7 years and a lot of energy before they could reach the West Woods at the border of the Federation. The reason why the Federation was able to remain stable in the face of the Empire's barbaric and violent invasion was because of the glory of the Charter, which was spread throughout the universe where the Federation was located. The two space passages under their control played an important role. The creator of the universe was of very mysterious existence. Any large fleet that tried to force its way through the shortcuts it created before grasping the rules it left behind would cause the sky to change color and space to become turbulent. However, this universe did not seem to have much interest in those lowly existences it disdained. The space storm caused by any aircraft that entered the space channel was directly proportional to the mass of the aircraft. Although the Imperium was still unable to send an army to break through the space channel, in the past few decades, many brave Imperial Royal Mecha warriors rode simple and crude small spaceships, like ants, quietly and even humbly passed through the space channel under the watchful eyes of the creator of the universe. This was an extremely dangerous attempt. Although the space storm caused by the small spaceships was relatively smaller, the defense of the small spaceships was also extremely weak. Those spaceships that constantly tried to sneak through were like a small boat in the ocean. They could be sunk to the bottom of the ocean at any time and never be able to turn over again. Even if the Imperium's special forces were lucky enough to break through the space channel, they would be greeted by the Federal fleet's never-ending surveillance and precision attacks outside the space channel. Only by relying on great strength and unbelievable luck could the Imperium's special forces achieve their tactical objective. However, they were unable to penetrate deep into the Federation and could only land on the Bermuda mineral planet near Gary Corridor. During this process, for every 100 top-notch special mecha warriors that the Imperium sent out, at most 7 or 8 of them would be able to land on the surface of the Bermuda mineral planet alive. Although there were not many of them, the Federal military would never let their guard down. The mission carried out by the Whitewater Company's combat team and the troops led by Li Feng was to wipe out these fish that escaped the net on these mineral planet. The problem was that these Imperium soldiers who survived the space storm and the pursuit of the Federal fleet usually possessed extremely terrifying individual strength. They were not easy to deal with. The survival rate of big fish, small fish, and shrimps ultimately depended on the size and density of the holes in the fishing net that the fishermen weaved. The two torsional voids, the Night Scorpion Nebula and the Gary Corridor, strictly put the simple philosophical proposition into practice. They allowed the information fragments that wandered between mass and energy to pass through their body freely without reacting at all. That was why the Imperium was able to remotely control the lone expeditionary army outside of 7 years. Although the transmission of military intelligence between the two was difficult, it had never been cut off. In fact, in the center of the highly centralized civilization in the outer left star sector, in the tallest building in the capital of planet Tianjing, there was a person who could even watch the Federation's television news. Of course, compared to the transmission of information with a purpose, this kind of reverse information reception was much more difficult. Although the signals of images and sounds were not destroyed in the turbulence of the space channel, they had become extremely weak. To reassemble such weak signals and send them through the information accelerator to travel through the universe where even light felt distant, the Imperium had expended a large amount of resources and energy. Therefore, other than the Imperial Military Department and the Royal Intelligence Bureau, which were responsible for monitoring the movements of the Federation, only one person among the countless ministers and citizens in the vast Imperium could watch these news programs. In the center of the Empire's Tianjing planet, there was a majestic plaza in the center of countless wide high-grade road. However, compared to the endless ancient buildings behind it, this plaza seemed ordinary and small. This building complex was the Imperial Palace of the Imperium. For tens of thousands of years, this Imperial Palace had enjoyed the worship of countless planets in the left star sector. It had mercilessly absorbed the blood and sweat of hundreds of millions of citizens, accumulating hundreds of millions of wealth. This was the reason why it was so imposing and innumerable buildings. In the depths of the Imperial Palace, a slightly gloomy palace-style skyscraper rose from the ground and pierced straight into the sky. Together with the continuous development of the dark-colored buildings that covered the entire capital city like a carpet, it was like a sharp sword that drove the subjects on the ground to ask the universe who was the real master. The grandeur was vast and awe-inspiring. In the early years of the Imperium, the famous fleet commander Reger, on a journey back to planet Tianjing, looked at the eye-catching green buildings in the center of the planet from tens of thousands of kilometers away. He had once lamented that this was probably the most magnificent achievement of human civilization that could be seen with the naked eye in the universe. At that time, the Imperium did not know that there were other humans in this part of the universe, and that there was even a deformed society called the Federation. However, even many years later, if the Federation and the Imperium were to be counted, this imperial palace on planet Tianjing was still the most awe-inspiring building. If one could look down at the imperial palace from a low altitude, the visual impact would definitely be greater. However, for tens of thousands of years, no aircraft had ever dared to fly near the imperial palace. There was also no building on this planet that dared to exceed the height of the sword-like building in the imperial palace. This was because Her Majesty was in the imperial palace. Her Majesty was in Zhai Xinglu. The architectural design of Zhai Xinglu was actually very simple. The bottom floor was as empty as the wilderness, and there were only countless giant pillars supporting it and automated transportation equipment. However, on the top 3 floors of the building, there was a palace that was so luxurious that it was difficult to look at it directly. It was called the Suspended Palace. The violent wind outside the Suspended Palace, after passing through those seemingly weak but actually endowed with high-tech gauze curtains, turned into a leisurely breeze, causing the people living inside to spontaneously feel as if they were riding the wind. They were so happy that they even wanted to pluck the stars from the sky. However, the servants and palace maids did not dare to have any such intoxicated expressions. They humbly maintained a smile and kept their heads down, not daring to look at the situation in the soft couch at the back of the palace. The lighting in the palace was very dim. A young man in a military uniform was half kneeling in front of a screen. His face could not be seen clearly, but his figure was slightly thin and did not look like a strong and powerful soldier of the Imperium. On the screen was a brilliant oil painting of sunflowers, reflecting a shadow. The shadow was raising his hand to rub his head, as if he was complaining endlessly. The group of trash of the News Inspection Department, in fact, they should watch more of the Federation's programs. This was a middle-aged man wearing a large robe. His voice was calm and ordinary, and there was nothing special about it. However, when it fell into the ears of people, it made people feel unusually cold and frightened. The young soldier in front of the screen lowered his head and said in a clear voice, "Understood." The middle-aged man sat on the couch and did not turn his head. Just the back of his figure gave off a suffocating feeling of oppression. He looked at the news conference on the screen and looked at the cute little girl with purple hair. He was silent, as if he wanted to find some memories from her eyes, and he also wanted to find some stories from the bracelet on her hand. His slender fingers stroked the harp beside him, and the low sound of the harp came from behind the screen again, immediately disturbing the sound of the harp. "Huai Chaoshi." The young soldier in front of the screen answered in a clear voice, "Yes. Go and tell that useless uncle of yours. If he insists on letting your even more useless uncle carry out that useless mission, then let him be. I can't be bothered with him." The voice behind the screen said indifferently, "Let Umbori and those guys who are vacationing in a foreign land take back the bracelet on this girl's hand. Capture her or kill her." The young soldier in front of the screen stiffened slightly. He lowered his head and said, "I've already applied to follow the previous mission in secret. Although the risk is high, I've been there once and still came back alive. I believe in your ability." The middle-aged man behind the screen said sadly, "It's a pity that my dear brother will never come back. Prince De Lin will definitely be immortal." The soldier named Huai Chaoshi replied softly. Among all his uncles, only the one who had died in the Federation and whom he had never seen before was worthy of respect. "Yes, eat," the man behind the screen ordered. Huai Chaoshi's body stiffened again. He stood up with some difficulty, walked behind the screen, and picked up a thorn. He lowered his head and stood behind the middle-aged man. A servant had already placed the food on the table. The middle-aged man raised his chopstick. Huai Chaoshi viciously whipped the thorn in his hand. The thorn fell, and a bloody wound appeared on the middle-aged man's back. "Your Majesty, have you forgotten about the revenge of killing your father?" He grunted in pain, gripped his chopsticks tightly, and replied coldly, "I haven't forgotten." Another thorn viciously whipped down. "Your Majesty, have you forgotten about your brother, who left home when he was young?" "No." Slap. "Your Majesty, have you forgotten about the bloodline of the royal family?" "No." A clear voice of reproach sounded in the tallest palace of the Empire's imperial palace. The sound of the thorn hitting the body and the painful reply came one after another from behind the screen. Chapter 400. Does His Majesty not know that this could be a bait? The young officer walked along the path covered with an expensive alpaca blanket and walked out of Zhaixing Tower. He didn't turn back to look at the awe-inspiring Zhaixing Hall. His heart carried a trace of indescribable doubt and uneasiness. Why Chaosher? It was said that when His Majesty was naming him, he happened to read a line of poetry. Nostalgia is a line of scribbled poetry. For some reason, His Majesty was deeply moved. From then on, this name had followed him as he grew up day by day. Compared to other Empire soldiers, Huai Chaosher was on the shorter side. His body was slightly thin, but he didn't feel weak. His military uniform didn't have epaulets to indicate his rank, but the close-fitting cut of his slender body fully displayed the lines of strength hidden in each step he took. Although Huai Chaosher didn't know why the Federation was so certain that the nation's maiden could move His Majesty so much, he naturally couldn't be sure that this was a trap. However, his military intuition cultivated on the battlefield still made him feel a strong sense of unease. But so what if it was a bait? His Majesty didn't care at all. Whether it was the expeditionary army alone in the West Woods or the palace maids in the glorious royal palace, they were all his people. Thinking of the true anger hidden in His Majesty's calm expression, Huai Chaosher's thin eyebrows raised slightly. He was sure that His Majesty didn't care at all about the heavy price the expeditionary army would have to pay in order to quell the anger that came out of nowhere. Huai Chaosher had never doubted His Majesty's ability. Back when His Majesty was still Prince Norton, he didn't hesitate to take the risk and force his way through the space tunnel in the Jelly Corridor just to go to Bermuda and personally awaken the brother hidden in the Federation to complete the huge plan left behind by the Great Teacher. This kind of thing wasn't something that a normal noble of the royal family could do. Huai Chaosher stood on the self-propelled track and looked coldly at the entrance to the underground military building in front of the palace. She thought about the uncle in charge of military affairs and thought that if he were to go through the space tunnel, he would probably immediately get the sanatorium to issue him with a diagnosis of schizophrenia. Even with Huai Chaosher's identity, he still had to go through a strict security check before he could enter the underground building of the military headquarters. However, when he walked through the long security check door, the officer in charge of the check immediately destroyed all the scanned images. In the process of destroying them, they didn't even dare to look at the images. His Majesty's orders. In the most secure room in the Empire's military headquarters, Huai Chaosher handed over an electronic signature. She looked at Prince Bo Wu behind the office desk and said in a deep voice, "Also, His Majesty said that if that guy who only knows how to whip the warriors to vent his anger wants to carry out his first transmigration mission, he can go as he pleases. However, I have to follow him." Prince Bo Wu was the brother of the Emperor and had been in charge of the military headquarters for more than 10 years. As the most powerful military minister of the Empire, he looked at the young officer in front of the desk without any arrogance on his face. He even deliberately explained in a gentle tone, "You also know that although some of the data of the space tunnel has been deciphered, it is still too little. Keaton is indeed reckless and competitive, but he has a lot of experience in leading troops. He is more suitable to carry out this kind of first transmigration mission. Also, if you are injured, how can I explain it to His Majesty?" but he is also His Majesty's brother and my uncle. Although I insist that transmigration in such a short period of time won't help the situation at the front line, since the military headquarters insisted, I have to follow. I can't just watch him get killed by the Federation soldiers." After saying this, Huai Chaoshu coldly saluted and turned to leave. After Huai Chaoshu left, Prince Bo Wu was in a daze behind his luxurious desk for a long time before he woke up. He didn't mind Keaton's impoliteness because Keaton was the son of His Majesty, and Keaton had absolutely terrifying strength to support his indifference. What made him dazed was His Majesty's electronic signature. Such a completely unreasonable military operation was very likely to cause the death of 1/3 of the Imperial Expeditionary Force. What was His Majesty thinking? After a minute, he walked out of the office with a cold face. He successfully digested the shock and returned to his role as the military minister. He passed His Majesty's order to his subordinates and forwarded it to the distant Imperial Expeditionary Force. He himself took the high-speed elevator and came to the hall at the bottom of the military headquarters. Countless military officers were busy in the hall. The computing power of the military headquarters of the Empire was far inferior to the old things in the Federation. The entire hall was filled with the sound of orders, and it was slightly chaotic. Prince Bai Wu looked at everything in front of him with a cold face. He had forgotten about the strange military order of His Majesty, because in the past few years, he had spent most of his energy on the 3 most important missions of the Empire, and the hall in front of him was dealing with one of them. Prince Keaton's direct command fleet has already followed the order and will arrive at the designated area in about a month. The fleet has been asking when the portal will be opened. A major general of the Empire came to Prince Bo Wu's side and said in a low voice. Prince Bo Wu frowned and thought about what Huai Chaoshu said. Keaton was a brave man, but sometimes he was too impulsive, barbaric, and bloodthirsty. Was it too careless to let him carry out such an important transmigration mission? It's just an experimental transmigration. Do you think he dares to kill his way to the capital ring of the Federation? Prince Bo Wu said sarcastically, "Send an encrypted message to him again. We can only calculate the data curve of the portal within 7 days. If he is really so happy in the Federation's star system that he forgets to go home, then he will be captured by the Federation." The Major General nodded. Prince Bo Wu looked at the busy military officers in the hall with a cold face and felt the pressure and majesty that made him very happy. He enjoyed the taste of war and felt a little regretful. It was a pity that the hero's brother didn't have time to get all the data of the portal. What he sent back 5 years ago was only fragment. Yes, in the hall at the bottom of the Empire's military building, an extremely important project was being carried out. Countless scientists were involved in it, trying to study the data of the portal according to the relevant data that Macklin sent back to the Empire a few years ago. Unfortunately, until today, the biggest progress they made was to calculate the activity pattern of the 2 portals filled with storms in a short period of time. Once the fleet entered the portal, it would cause a large disturbance to the environment of the portal, and the data model would enter an irreversible range. More importantly, they didn't know if the Federation had the ability to affect the portal. It looks good, but it doesn't have a decisive effect on this war. Prince Bo Wu thought angrily. Other than the critical 7 days, the research of the military scientists couldn't break through the upper limit of quality. In other words, even if the research was successful, the Empire could only send a medium-sized fleet through the portal again and again. That was equivalent to letting the Federation eat away at their own strength. One day we will attack the home of these invaders. Prince Bo Wu opened his mouth slightly and said coldly. At this time, the Major General beside him received a phone call. A hint of excitement appeared in the Major General's eyes. He looked up and said to Prince Bo Wu, "Your Royal Highness, regarding this experimental transmigration, maybe we have a very good hunting target." Back in the office, Prince Bo-wu looked at the report that was jointly obtained by the military and the Royal Intelligence Agency. His face showed a hint of disbelief. He said in a deep voice, "The key is the source. I never thought that the military and the Royal Intelligence Agency would be able to get information from the Federation." The head of the Royal Intelligence Agency rubbed his hands excitedly and answered quickly, "The information came from Bermuda. It was a direct contact. The source is a hero. His physiological markers have been confirmed. There is absolutely no problem." Hero? This was a great name that was used so much that it was tiresome. But Prince Bo-wu's eyes lit up. Because the Empire's Hero Project was the seed project in the eyes of the Federation government, Prince Bo-wu narrowed his eyes and said sternly, "It has been many years since he was awakened. Especially when the Federation recently discovered this project. How did he awaken on his own?" His Majesty once gave Prince Doring an awakening list. There are not many heroes on the list. Most of them have been identified and arrested by the Federation Bureau of Proclamation. But he is the one who hides the deepest. The head of the Royal Intelligence Agency explained, "The most important reason is that he works in the military's intelligence department. This is very helpful for him to hide himself. No wonder he was able to know the top-secret schedule of the federal military." Prince Bai-wu said, "Verify the intelligence. If it's correct, let him continue to lurk. Other than the few people on Master Fan's core list, he's probably our only compatriot in the Federation. A mere supply fleet is not worth his sacrifice." Prince Bo-wu coldly looked at the high-ranking officers in the room. His dark brown eyes flashed with a hint of cruelty. He said in a deep voice, "Let him know the top-secret schedule of the federal military as soon as possible." The high-ranking officers in the room were shocked. They did not understand what he meant. Only the Major General who accompanied Prince Bo-wu to inspect the hall at the bottom level thought of something. Let County King Carlton's fleet slow down. Postpone the test of crossing the space tunnel indefinitely. Prince Bo-wu stood up and said coldly, "In order to give the Federation a surprise gift, we have to make sure that when the first fleet passes through the space tunnel, we will cause them unbearable losses." The officers in the room slowly came to their senses. The head of the Royal Intelligence Agency asked with a trembling voice, "The target of the surprise attack. Who should we target?" "If Li Pifu is going to the Westwoods, that would be the best. But that old guy only knows how to hide at home like a turtle," Prince Bo-wu said coldly. "Other than him, there is only the tiger in the West Woods. The Empire's research on the space tunnel could only allow a mid-sized fleet to make a round trip in 7 days. Unless they wanted to give up on that fleet." Just like what Prince Bo-wu said before, this kind of result looked good in the war between the two forces, but in reality, it had no strategic significance. But everything was changed because of that seed. If they knew the top-secret schedule of the federal military, 7 days, a mid-sized fleet, seemed to be able to complete a bloody surprise attack that the Federation would never expect. It's hard to write and it's not good. I admit it. The story is in my heart, but it's hard to write it out. Reporting to everyone, I will only write 2 chapters today. I will continue to be invincible tomorrow. Even I feel embarrassed to say it, but I will definitely write 3 chapters tomorrow. This is because I have to write 1 more chapter than the 8 days before the end of the month that I promised last time. When I write a completely new plot, there is a bit of a bitter feeling. Although I often tremble with excitement from thinking about the follow-up plot in my head, but it is really a headache to write out the story in my head. The most important thing is that I need to reconstruct a familiar structure in my head. Especially when it comes to military affairs, I've always been lacking in them. When I was writing about Qin Yunian, I deliberately practiced in this area and improved. Then, I was very masochistic in writing about spies. This is a guy who uses firearms. I'm just like Emperor Huai Fu-chai. Let me think about how to fight this battle tonight. Perhaps I'll still choose a different perspective and use a borderline narrative. please don't misunderstand this phrase. Good night, everyone. I will continue to think. I thought about the night before when I wrote 2 chapters. I wrote the outline until 2:30 at night. My thoughts were clear and I felt very good. I hope I can have the same feeling later. Chapter 401. The upper echelons of the Imperial Army had drafted a grand and sinister plan for a long time. That night, the plan was approved by the Emperor. Thus, all the officers in the underground building of the Imperial Army started to carry out complicated tactical simulations. They had to make sure that this bloody surprise attack was flawless, even if it was just a possibility. Thinking about the impact the surprise attack would have on the universe and the endless humiliation and pain it would bring to the people of the Federation, the staff officers of the Imperial Army were so excited that their eyes turned red and their bodies trembled. Naturally, they forgot about the other urgent military order that the Imperial Army had received that day. But after that, they immediately remembered that the expeditionary force far away in the Federation's territory had been ordered by the Imperial Palace. Instantly, their hearts trembled. From the Minister of Military Affairs to the lowest-ranking staff officers, no one dared to underestimate the Emperor's orders. They didn't want to see the Empire's last fortress in the Federation's territory fall apart, and they didn't want to see the Emperor explode in anger because of this. The frequency of information transmission between Tianjing and the 3 star systems at the edge of the Federation's West Woods was suddenly encrypted. The Imperial Army's General Staff Office started to have intensive discussions with the military leaders of the Expeditionary Force to make strategic arrangements for the Expeditionary Force to attack the planet's southern hemisphere. For the past 20 years, the Imperial Expeditionary Force's main strategy had been to defend the 2.5 star systems under their control and wait for reinforcements. They would act as a nail to wedge into the Federation's territory and preserve as much of their strength as possible when it was obvious that they wouldn't be able to expand their victory. They would restrain the federal military's large forces and buy time for the Empire's great counterattack. With just a few words from the Emperor, the Expeditionary Force had to give up on their established and effective strategy. Just for the sake of a young female Federation star, they had to turn out in full force and shed blood. This kind of disregard for the lives of the Expeditionary Force's soldiers really made the officers of the General Staff Office feel cold and confused, but no one dared to say that this was the Emperor's reckless order. General Ambly stood in the snow below the circular base. His sparse beard was covered in frost from the heat. He quietly looked at the encrypted electronic document and thought to himself, "Your Majesty, this is a random order, but I don't think any of the officials would dare to object." The old general looked back at the magnificent and cold glacier behind the base and felt a slight chill. All the belongings of the Maple Forest Formation were hidden there. Were they going to throw everything in for the national girl of the Federation? He could not understand the Emperor's military orders, but he would carry them out without question. He would not drag his feet. On one hand, it was because of his supreme reverence for the Emperor. On the other hand, it was because his family was still far away in his hometown. Is it to stop this concert from going on and strike a blow to the Federation's confidence? Or is it because of something else? Old General Ambly's eyes sunk as he thought to himself, "The people in the South must have been prepared. The concert is definitely not a good time." His judgment was not wrong. The big shots of the federal military were not a bunch of idiots. They dared to agree to Jian Shuer's request and let her enter the real front line to hold a concert for the military. Naturally, they knew how dangerous this matter was. The Federal Army in the Southern Hemisphere had already entered a state of alert. What was even more frightening was that the Federation's medium-sized fleet had been patrolling in space, coldly suppressing the planet's firepower line. This fleet had escorted Jian Shuer and her group into Huiming Corridor and had not retreated. Other than angering the Federation, what good is it for the Empire to pay such a high price to kill that young female celebrity? General Ambly quietly thought to himself. Then he ordered the Norman officer in a hoarse voice, "The General Staff Headquarters has an emergency meeting to discuss this matter. For the sake of the Emperor's word, they had to fight and they had to win." At the very least, General Ambly was very sure that this was definitely not a trap set by the Federation. General Ambly believed that his counterparts in the federal military had been retarded, naive, and stupid decades ago. However, after so many years of war, and Lipifu had brought up an entire generation of outstanding generals, the current federal military staff would not use such petty and childish method. More importantly, even he, who had been on the battlefield for many years, could not think of any benefits for his Maple Forest alliance to go to the south to hunt down that young female celebrity. This proved that no matter how much Jian Shuer was doted on by the Federation, she was still just a celebrity. She had no strategic value, and was not qualified to be bait on the battlefield. This was a very simple logical inference. Since there was no reason for her to be bait, the theory of a trap was naturally not valid. The people in the South have been continuously increasing their troops in the past few months. They should be preparing for something big. This concert may be the publicity for this big move. General Ambly held his teacup like an ordinary old man. He slowly said to his subordinates in a hoarse voice, "Since we are going to fight, of course we can't just focus on that celebrity. We have to win, and we have to beat their momentum." The old general slowly raised his head. His somewhat cloudy eyes suddenly lit up. He swept his gaze across the faces of the officers in the room one by one. In a deep voice, he said, "The orders from the military are only to kill or capture the target, but I think the Maple Forest Alliance can do more." The officers in the command room saw the sudden brilliance in the old man's face. They quickly stood up and saluted. Since they were going to attack with all their strength, it was not worth it to just complete the mission given by the Emperor. The Imperial Expeditionary Force would definitely not be satisfied with this. They wanted to take advantage of the situation and vent their resentment and hatred for the Federation for many years. This did not violate the orders of the military. In fact, perhaps their comrades in the distant homeland also hoped that they would have such courage and courage. General Ambly slowly stood up and placed his teacup on the table. He looked at his subordinates who were standing upright and said, "The General Staff Headquarters will draft the battle plan as soon as possible. The Alliance will mobilize. I only have one request. The battle plan must be reported quickly." In the cruel interweaving battle on the planet's surface, the Empire and the Federal Army had long known each other's depth. General Ambly's request for "quickly" was exceptionally accurate and pointed out the main point of this attack. Although the southern side of the planet still had the Federation's electronic surveillance network, this planet was once completely occupied by the Imperial Expeditionary Force. No one knew how many nodes set up by the Bureau of Proclamation many years ago had been destroyed. The Federation had only reclaimed the southern hemisphere for a dozen years. It was impossible to restore the glory of the Charter in such a short period of time. This was where the Imperial Expeditionary Force's confidence came from. As long as they were fast enough and entered the battlefield at the right time, the Expeditionary Force was confident that they could openly suppress the people in the south and catch them off guard. Even if the broken charter could see them, they would not be able to mobilize troops in time to respond. It was like the thunderstorm night in the southern hemisphere during summer. Lightning flashed in the night sky like snakes. You knew that after the flash of light, there would be a rumble of thunder, but you could not react at all. You could only watch, wait, and slowly cover your ears. 40 minutes later, under the control of the Imperial Expeditionary Force in the Northern Hemisphere of 5,460, 17 mountain-style military airfields were activated at the same time. Countless black dots of miniature drones buzzed as they took off, flew over the glaciers and forests, and flew towards the south. The Moonwolf Group, which was the best at long-distance raids, began to overcharge. The electronic troops under the command of the Expeditionary Army could not avoid the monitoring of the radiance of the charter, but they used methods that had been hidden all along. They cleverly passed through the remaining civil communication lines underground and began to attempt to hack into a broadcasting relay station that had just arrived on this planet. It was the concert broadcasting equipment of the Federation television. All of this was to prepare for the upcoming war. The expeditionary force had to do everything possible to confirm the location of Jian Shuer. Although the expeditionary force headquarters had more long-term plans, they had to first satisfy the Emperor's request while fiercely attacking the Federal Army in the south. Old General Ambly and a few officers silently stood on the observation tower of the circular base, looking at the glaciers behind the base. A huge alloy door suddenly appeared in the middle of the glaciers. Countless self-driving mechanical tanks and fighter jets slowly drove out of the underground base with a murderous aura. They came out of the ice and snow so naturally they carried with them a sense of ice and snow. The same scene was happening at the foot of countless glaciers in the northern hemisphere. The three most powerful mechanical brigades of the Maple Forest Alliance would all be thrown into this absurd war that was destined to go down in history. Although the battle on this planet was only the prelude to this magnificent war, it was still a battle that was destined to go down in history. Old General Ambly calmly looked at the rumbling tanks under his feet that crushed through the ice and the fighter jets that were undergoing pre-battle inspection. His old heart was unprecedentedly full and healthy. A general could only release his brilliance on the battlefield. On this planet far away from home, other than the flying artillery, what else could dispel the terrible loneliness? But even at this moment, he still didn't forget the Emperor's strict order. He muttered to himself, "Little girl, even if you want to hide or run, I will make sure you have nowhere to go. You can only walk into the place I want you to go." The old general firmly believed that once the attack began, the Federation's national girl would definitely not be able to board a battleship and leave this lonely planet where it was difficult for her to return home. This was because 2 hours ago, the last and strongest fleet of the Empire's expeditionary army left behind at Westwood's border was silently sailing towards the star sector where Planet 5460 was located. The air quality of Planet 5460 was extremely good. It was unusually clear, even more transparent than the atmosphere of the administrative planet of the Westwood. The people who walked out of the battleships couldn't help but look up at the blue sky. Most of them were from the capital ring, and they had never seen such a clear sky in their lives. Su Lu took off his sunglasses and squinted at the faintly visible Federation battleships above his head. He couldn't help but be shocked by the vastness of his field of vision. In his mind, he began to suspect the real reason why these battleships didn't leave. The Federal fleet had always patrolled in the middle space of the star system. Patrolling in low space like this required them to resist the huge gravitational force of the planet. The energy consumption was not something the current Federation was willing to bear. "What's wrong?" Jian Shuer walked down from the black car and asked curiously. Su Lu lowered his head, put on his sunglasses again, and explained, "It's the first time I've seen such a clear sky. I'm not used to it. I feel a little nervous. I saw a book friend say that Huai Chaosher killed the Emperor of the Empire and asked him if he had forgotten the revenge of killing his father. This part was copied from Yining. I like Yining a lot, but I read it too early and forgot if there was such a part. Actually, I copied from Wu Wang Fu Chai. I think Killer King copied from the same person as me." Chapter 402. There were not many officers who came to Zhe Qiu's military spaceport to participate in the small welcoming ceremony. Su Lu stood below the stage and looked at the soldiers through his sunglasses. He thought that compared to the momentum created on the Westwood's administrative planet, the officers on this planet did not seem to care much about the victory concert. The frontline command headquarters actually only sent a major general. Most of the Federal Army stationed in the southern hemisphere of Planet 5460 were directly subordinate troops of the West Woods Military District. There were only 2 divisions of troops from the Capital Ring who came to participate in the rotational battle. The frontline command headquarters led the military operations of the entire planet, so at least 1 lieutenant general was available. Sulu did not think that this was the military ignoring the performance team. Instead, he thought that the generals in the headquarters were probably busy with something important. The aftermath of the news could not be calmed down. Although this was the absolute frontier and absolute frontline, the soldiers still knew of Suli's existence through the television and the internet. The soldiers in the formation listened to the unoriginal welcome speech on the rostrum and looked at the national girl on the stage excitedly. Many of them also looked at Sulu curiously. This young man who didn't seem to have any abnormalities was that guy from the legends? The sunglasses covered Suli's eyes. He did not care about the strange looks around him. Under the cover of the sunglasses, no one knew that he, who was silent with his hands behind his back, was actually having a direct communication with a great being. A faint light appeared in his left eye. The old man did not seem to like to appear in his mind with the face of the old butler. Instead, he used the light talismans to communicate with him directly. I think this is a big deal, but I don't know when the Department of Defense will tell the truth about the mission. Sulu thought in his mind. I'm carrying out a military mission. If something really happens to the concert, you have to help me. I can't let anything happen to Jian Shuer. The glory of the charter was an invisible existence, but in his left eye, rows of characters could be seen with the naked eye. A row of characters flashed. The electronic monitoring network in the Northern Hemisphere has been completely destroyed. Less than 2% is left. It is unable to support the overall monitoring calculation. The Southern Hemisphere is 47% complete. The overall monitoring calculation can be attempted. Can I know what the DoD is doing in secret? You don't have the authority in this area, but I think you will receive a new mission soon. Sulu understood what he meant. He stood silently in the sunshine of Zaichou Airport. According to the old man, as long as he stayed in the Southern Hemisphere, he could protect himself and Jian Shuer no matter what the people of the Empire in the North did or what the Department of National Defense secretly planned. After the simple welcome ceremony, the concert team left Zaichou Airport with the guidance vehicle and military police sent by the frontline command and headed north. The further north they went, the hotter they felt. The clear sky outside the black car seemed like it could burn up at any time. Jian Shuer sat in the back with her eyes wide open. She looked at the wreckage of fighter jets that could often be seen on both sides of the road and the armored vehicles that had been burned into black soil. Her clear eyes did not burn, but there was a faint sadness in them. In the following journey, Jian Shuer, accompanied by military officials, came to the 3rd hospital of the planet to visit the wounded soldiers who were receiving treatment. The soldiers who were seriously injured on the battlefield would be transported back to the main planet of the West Woods for treatment. But because of the limited transport capacity, a large number of the wounded were still receiving treatment on the spot. They would be transferred after their conditions stabilized. In the intensive care ward of the sterile space on the 2nd floor, there were many soldiers who were permanently disabled. Some of them had their legs blown off by anti-infantry mines, some of them had their arms cut off by high-speed rotating bullets scattered by the Empire mecha, and some of them had most of their skin burned by the incendiary bombs dropped from the sky. Jian Shuer, who was wearing a light blue sterile suit, did not just say a few words of encouragement to the soldiers and leave the hospital. Instead, she sat quietly beside the bed and began to talk to the seriously injured soldiers. The national girl came to his side. Her clear voice was filled with sunshine, bringing warmth and comfort to these soldiers who had suffered heavy blows. The gloomy and even somewhat desperate atmosphere in the ward changed a lot because of her arrival. Jian Shuer softly sang a song for them. She turned her head and said cutely, "I'm so useless." When he said this, even the second lieutenant, who had 70% of his burn area, laughed. It was just that his heavily injured face hadn't had time to undergo skin grafting and muscle regeneration surgery, so he looked abnormally terrifying. Especially when he laughed, one could actually see the pink muscle fibers on his left cheek and the white teeth that were exposed in the air. Not everyone dared to look at this face. Most of the team members who came to visit the wounded stayed away from this bed. Sister Tong had a look of pity on her face as she quietly stood behind. Only Jian Shuer sat beside him, and Su Lu stood behind her. Su Lu watched silently. He did not know how many people he had killed in his life and how many bloody and cruel scenes he had seen. But when he looked at a severely burned soldier, he still felt cold and numb in his heart. However, he did not see a trace of disgust on Jian Shuer's pink cheeks. What impressed him even more was that the national girl did not show any expression of pity. She just smiled cutely, as if the burned soldier on the bed was an extremely ordinary person. Not far behind the 3rd Military Hospital was the graveyard. After the news reporter finished filming the scene of Jian Shuer offering flowers to the hero's cemetery, he was politely asked to leave. In the green grassland, Su Lu walked slowly with Jian Shuer. He saw that the girl's eyes were already wet. For decades, in order to resist the invasion of the Empire, countless young and hot-blooded people had been buried here. Only close to 4,000 of these soldiers were buried in this cemetery. However, as far as the eye could see, all one could see were black tombstones in the gentle green grassland. They didn't seem like lush trees, but rather like black gems scattered throughout the grassland. Looking at this scene, there was no fear of death in the hearts of the two of them. There was only a faint sadness and respect. Jian Shuer turned around. Her big eyes were full of a strong smile and tears that she had not had time to wipe away. She said, "Many people died for victory. If we do something for this, it is very reasonable, right?" "Yes, so you have to hold a victory concert." It was not as simple as a concert. Although the old man insisted on maintaining his authority and did not tell Su Lu the top-secret military information, he was sure that his deduction would not be wrong through his own observations these days. Leaving the hospital and the cemetery, he entered the frontline military camp. Looking at the multi-level automatic farms watered by water droplets and listening to the sounds of cards in the barracks around him that were filled with West Woods accents, Su Lu was slightly stunned. He felt as if he had returned to the training base. The sun here was so bright that he really did not feel the tension of an impending war. Turning around the barracks, there were countless soldiers on the field undergoing close combat training under the scorching sun. Battle cries shook the sky. Although armed infantrymen rarely had the chance to meet the Empire's soldiers, the soldiers of the Federation had never forgotten the bloodlust that close combat training could bring to them. The camouflage military uniforms had long been rubbed by the dirt and stones. The soldiers' bodies fell heavily on the hard ground, and then they climbed up resolutely. The battle cries and the orderly landing of the soldiers soared into the sky. It was so exciting that the people in the convoy were thirsty. The earth trembled slightly. 7 black M52 mechas walked out from behind the barracks. The heavy mechas towered over the canopy of the trees. They moved silently in the wind, as if they were returning home. Gripping the steering wheel tightly, Su Lu finally smiled when he saw this scene. Being on the front line, he could truly confirm that he was indeed very used to this kind of battlefield atmosphere. Even his body was beginning to itch. Jian Shuer in the back saw the sunny smile on his face. Thinking that the Ministry of Defense would probably not hand over the mission to Group 7 until after the concert, she asked curiously, "What are you thinking about?" Su Lu smiled, revealing a mouth full of healthy white teeth. He said, "I'm thinking that no matter what might happen at the concert, no matter what the Ministry of Defense wants me to do, But if those Empire people really dare to come to the south, this young master will definitely make them regret it a little. The convoy entered the base. The MX Mecca that had been closely guarded was transferred into the heavily guarded warehouse. The concert was set for 2 days later. The relevant technical installation and rehearsals would begin tonight. The concert broadcast organization had already arrived at Planet 5460 10 days ago. The concert stage had already been set up. All that was left was for the engineers in Jian Shuer's team to perform the final adjustments. Of course, the broadcast organization for the Victory concert could only be the Federation television station. From the age of 12, Jian Shuer had cooperated with the Federation television station for all of her drama interviews and concert broadcasts. The two parties had cooperated countless times and were already very familiar with each other. Su Lu stood behind Jian Shuer. Seeing her smiling and greeting every staff member of the television station with a friendly and cute smile, an inexplicable sense of pride welled up in his heart. This was the uncle's daughter, the dream lover of his adolescence. She was indeed worthy of his love. However, no one noticed that at the side of the concert venue, the pulse balancing system of the high-power signal relay station had a momentary imbalance. It seemed that some kind of external signal was invading. It's a pity that we can't go and see the grand scene of the concert with our own eyes. Logically speaking, the rehearsal tonight should have given our fleet some signal. In the command hall of the Federal Fleet's flagship outside the planet's atmosphere, a middle-aged commander held a cup of coffee and looked at the brightly colored planet under his feet and said emotionally, "This Federation medium-sized fleet was composed of the Sinew series battleship. The commander of the fleet was a female major general in her 40s, Hong Yujing. She was the sister of the commander of the Federal Fleet, Hong Yuliang. Major General Hong Yuliang smiled and said, "The concert will be broadcasted to the entire Federation the day after tomorrow. We will be able to see it all the same." Her deputy commander suddenly frowned and asked in a low voice, "Wasting so much energy and leaving the fleet here just to ensure the smooth performance of a concert? I don't know what the Department of Defense is thinking when they spend so much energy." Major General Hong Yujing looked at him quietly and said with a smile, "Because this is a concert called Victory. There's one more chapter tonight, for sure. But at this time, I have to leave immediately. After all, it's the last day of the new year. I can only write it when I come back. There's too little time. Unfortunately, it's a bit rough. Originally, I really wanted to write the scene of the mecha walking through the canopy, but my brain isn't working well. I can't find the words. I'll find another chance to write that scene in the future." Chapter 403. Major General Hong Yujing didn't explain further to her deputy, because the secret military order was only passed to officers at her level, and it wasn't announced to the lower ranks. The Federation set up such a trap for the Imperial Expeditionary Force, so naturally, they didn't want to reveal any flaws from top to bottom. In fact, even she didn't know why the Ministry of Defense came up with such a plan. This plan seemed a bit naive and stupid. Would the Imperial Expeditionary Force really lose their mind and give up the defensive strategy that the enemy had persisted for more than a decade just because of that national girl? From her sister, General Hong Yuliang, she even knew that when President Pabre passed this military plan called the Victory Concert, he still didn't understand where the Ministry of Defense's confidence came from. However, in the end, President Prabal still made up his mind and passed this military plan. Just like the respectable president, Captain Hong Yujing did not understand, but she accepted it without any resistance. She also made meticulous tactical deductions and preparations for the upcoming war. Because this plan came from the old man beside Feiqing Lake. To the senior generals of the federal government and the military, the old man had long since taken off his martial uniform and returned to the lake. However, in the 68th year of the constitutional calendar, he once again stood up. What kind of inconceivable yet incomparably exciting news was this? The universe had been peaceful for too long, and the Federation had been waiting for too long. They couldn't tolerate the Empire's expeditionary force on their own land anymore. When the god of war made his move, the world was in chaos. No one knew why the wise and powerful old man forced this military plan, but everyone in the Federation firmly believed that under the wise leadership of the god of war, they would definitely win. Major General Hong Yujing knew that the mission of her fleet was to cover Jian Shuai's departure, but she also knew that if the Imperial Expeditionary Force really attacked, that old Fox Umbori would definitely not miss her. But could the Imperial Expeditionary Force calculate that the Federation spent a few months to set up a diversion just to bury a surprise force there? She looked at the planet below the porthole of the battleship. She looked at the light yellow mountain range at the intersection of white and green on the surface of the planet. She smiled and smoothed the wrinkles on her forehead. Looking from space, the mountain range looked pale yellow, but in reality, you would find that the mountain range was a deep brownish yellow. Other than a few green plants on the mountainside, the entire mountain range was barren. There was no trace of life, and it was lonely. Therefore, the highest peak in the mountain range was called the Lonely Mountain Range. That's the Lonely Mountain Range. Behind us is the Yellow Mountain Range. A few months ago at the training base, you should understand what it means by now. Behind a giant sunken rock, Du Shaoqing, the commander of the Iron 7th Division of the Federation's 3rd Military Region, coldly looked at the surroundings and said to Shimin-Jin, who was standing behind him, "You came later than the troops, so take the time to familiarize yourself with the tactical plan." "Yes, teacher." Shimin-Jin had just arrived at Planet 5460 not long ago. He was not wearing a military hat today, and his slightly dry black hair swayed in the dry wind of the Yellow Mountains. The Ministry of National Defense has prepared for so long, and even let the key military officers to cooperate with our maneuver to improve our understanding of this ambush. If we still can't win this battle, all of you will go back to S3 to be clerks, Du Shaoqing said coldly. All the military officers behind him had serious expressions. They all stood at attention and said in a deep voice, "We will complete the mission." Behind this group of military officers, countless firepower equipment suitable for mountainous warfare were undergoing the final adjustment and camouflage. Behind the artillery position, some large equipment was covered with dark yellow camouflage cloth. It was hard to tell what it was, but it looked like it was a mecha. The entire Iron 7th Division was now distributed between the Yellow Mountain Range and the Silent Mountain Range. However, with so many people and so many equipment, they did not make any noise or leave any traces on the mountain road. The tactical quality of the division was fully demonstrated during this preparation process. The results of the Ministry of National Defense's tactical deduction are out. A staff officer walked behind Du Shaoqing and said in a low voice. Then, with a pull of his hands, he opened the scroll-like electronic map and quickly operated with his hands, marking the places that needed attention. He explained to him and the officers around him, whether it's a feint or a full-scale attack, since the Department of Defense has determined that the other party is the target, we can't do anything. Then the opponent must attack Zaiqiu Airport before the warship takes off, thus forcing the target to move west from the concert location and leave the planet through Luoqiu Airport. The Yellow Mountain Range is the only route they have to pass through. Just to confuse our line of sight, there will definitely be a full-force attack on the line of demarcation. The opponent may not use a lot of power to carry out a surprise attack, but until now, the Ministry of National Defense has not determined how much power the Empire will put into this route. Outside of the Wolf Moon Mecha Brigade, how much firepower will there be? I don't want to know how many troops the Empire will send. Du Shaoqing looked at the ambush position under his feet and lightly waved his black lambskin gloves. He said with a rare emotion, "Since we are back, we can only leave with victory. Many years ago, This planet was the place where the Iron 7th Division had been reborn. During the Second Federal Defense War, the Iron 7th Division had single-handedly completed an inconceivable task of stopping 3 of the Empire's integrated brigades, buying precious time for the Federation's main forces to surround them. However, the Iron 7th Division had paid the price of being almost completely annihilated. The Iron 7th Division won glory in the end, but they did not receive the respect of the federal military. This was because the Veterans Association and the media who promoted the Iron 7th Division's achievements did not know the story behind that tragic attack. In that defensive battle decades ago, the previous commander and senior officers of the 7th Division missed the opportunity and were cowardly, causing a fatal strategic flaw to appear in the military's plan. The situation was very critical, and their entire division headquarters was surrounded by the Imperial Expeditionary Force. They were forced into a desperate situation, and the 7th Division had no choice but to desperately fight back. The 7th Division, which had suffered countless casualties, made a name for itself and gained the reputation of being the Iron 7th Division. How many people had died in the 3 Imperial regiments because of their once fleeting cowardice? The media and public who did not know the inside story only knew that the division had bravely killed the enemy, and thus promoted them to the position of the Iron 7th Division. How could the big shots in the military who knew the inside story be satisfied? From then on, the glory of the Iron 7th Division was purposely forgotten. Du Shaoqing's father was once a staff officer of the Iron 7th Division. He participated in this cruel defensive battle, and was one of the rare few who survived. However, a few years after Du Shaoqing was born, this officer, who was filled with endless guilt and fear, finally died of depression. Today, the truly reborn Iron 7th Division once again came to this planet that had brought them endless glory and humiliation. They were about to welcome a brand new military history. Du Shaoqing quietly looked at the undulating mountains of the planet and said slowly, "This is the first battle since the Iron 7th Division officially returned to the front lines after decades. This battle must be won." His sunglasses reflected the blue sky of Planet 5460 and the Yellow Mountains. It was a magnificent sight. The highly anticipated concert of the Federation officially began. Whether it was the Capitol Ring, the West Woods, or even the middle-aged man in the Empire's Tianjin building, everyone sat in their own comfortable seats and began to enjoy the concert either excitedly or silently. I lightly jumped into the river of love in front of me. The passers-by beside you can't compare to the gift box in your hand. Within a radius of 500 kilometers around the military camp in the southern hemisphere, 3 layers of defense were arranged. Countless military aircraft were on standby, and countless mechas were undergoing their final self-check. The fleet in space was watching this solemnly. However, the purple-haired girl standing on the stage did not know any of this. She just hugged a large microphone, tilted her head slightly, and stood on the graceful stage shrouded in blue light. Facing the darkness below, she hummed softly as if she was murmuring, "I'm sorry. I say, dear, dear, the passers-by beside you wish you a happy new year." The nation's young lady, Jian Shui'er, walked out of the clouds like a little fairy who had just come of age. Her purple hair was combed smoothly with a unique bow. She was as pure and cute as ever. However, her lips were painted bright red today. The red on her lips wasn't like blood, but like the smear of cinnabar on a white silk cloth. It was breathtaking and made the girl's pure face have a hint of the charm of an opera. The song ended. Other than the bright stage, the surroundings were silent. Other than darkness, there was only darkness. Even the sound of the audience's breathing couldn't be heard. Jian Shui'er stood on the stage alone and felt the loneliness that belonged only to her. She tilted her head in confusion and thought for a while. Then, she smiled sweetly towards the audience and said, "You can applaud now." As if they had received an order, the dark silence below the stage instantly collapsed. Applause and excited cheers instantly broke through the night of 5,460 people. This was the military camp. No matter how excited the Federation soldiers were in front of their dream idol, they still subconsciously maintained the cold silence of a mountain before they woke up from their daze. However, once they started to clap and express their excitement, the originally quiet and dark concert suddenly became a carnival scene. Amidst the thunderous applause, the director turned on the lights that had been deliberately suppressed for a few minutes. Countless beams of light began to madly sweep across the mountainous military camp. This was a rare scene of a simple concert in the Federation, but it was definitely the most enthusiastic and dazzling stage. The group of dancers wearing sky-blue miniskirts walked onto the stage. Under the dazzling lights, Jian Shuer removed the cute butterfly clip and combed the short purple hair on her head into a clump of extremely vigorous wild grass. She stuck out her tongue and walked to the front of the stage in her pretty leather boots. The music started. Jian Shuer looked at the densely packed soldiers below the stage and forced a serious smile. However, she didn't say anything. She just held the big microphone with both hands and lightly lowered her eyelashes. Like a quiet girl in an oil painting, she softly and attentively began to sing. When I was 12 years old, I became the poor orphan that you all liked very much. Unfortunately, you only know me as Jian Shuer, that little girl with no parent. When I was 14 years old, in your eyes, I began to enter the military academy to study. Unfortunately, you only know me as Jian Shuer, the purple-haired girl destined to board the warship. When I was 16 years old, I received a very thin bracelet. Unfortunately, you only know me as Jian Shuer, but you don't know what it means to me. On the first day of the 66th year of the constitutional era, I held my first concert. I was very nervous. Unfortunately, you only know me as Jian Shuer, but you don't know what kind of bloody rain rained down in the underground parking lot that day. On the 67th year of the constitutional era, I went to the mountainous 4 states, wanting to do my best. Unfortunately, you only know me as Jian Shuer, but you don't know how powerless I was in the ashes that day. I am the national girl, Jian XX. I am the national girl, Jian XX. When I smile, I'm not used to looking back. I'm not gentle. I just want to use my naturally cute smiling face to walk quietly with you, because I'm just an ordinary girl, Jian XX. Fireworks flew and the concert reached its climax. Su Le looked at the national girl on the stage with tears in his eyes. However, he didn't know that far away, countless missiles rose into the air, just like the fireworks that filled the sky behind the stage. Chapter 404. The reason why I can't not read it is because it's very long and tiring, and it doesn't cost me any money. Wouldn't you be losing out if you don't read it? Here's the main text. Unavoidably, I, Tomcat, Lazy Cat, will recall the past, report the present, look forward to the future, and open my account book. After all, the year is almost over, and it's about to enter an even number of years. First, I'm terrified. Don't laugh in a hurry. It's not because I'm terrified of receiving your love. It's because in the blink of an eye, it's already 2001. It's making a middle-aged man like me panic. I'm turning 33. How time flies. When I wrote a nonsense serial in 2001, there was a line in it. Hong Kong only returned yesterday, so how is it that in the blink of an eye, we're crossing the century? Back then, I thought that the speed of 3 years in the blink of an eye was terrifying, but now, I realize that 10 years in the blink of an eye is the true tragedy. When one is about to die, one's words are true. I'm still a long way from death, but the pressure makes me want to do something. I want to write a story, and I'm writing one now. I want to make a movie, and that's nonsense. Even something like a script makes me dizzy, and I can't appreciate its beauty. I want to marry a wife, and I'm about to marry one. Yes, this is a very long story. In a few days, I'll write a short story to commemorate my long-lost single life. Speaking of which, from 2004 onwards, many reading comrades thought I was married, but in fact, I wasn't. I was just booked. Digression, back to the topic. How can I not be terrified? Su Sanduo said to do meaningful things, and meaningful things are to live well. Then what does it mean to live well? Then he said he was doing something meaningful, which made it a tongue twister. From my point of view, to do meaningful things, you have to make living well concrete. For example, what you do for a living, what kind of happiness and satisfaction you get after living well. This is very simple. It's the sigh I've repeated countless times to everyone. Doing what you like and earning money is happiness. The second is happiness. When I started writing this year-end speech, I was worried that there wouldn't be anything to write. Of course, when I saw the long paragraph of nonsense at the beginning, I realized that I had underestimated my nagging and long-winded abilities. The reason for this worry is that I always feel that when I look back on the year, there has to be some ups and downs in this year's life. Just like what Gidge Pig said to Ing Xiu a long time ago. Or was it Ziyuan who said it? I forgot. It was probably because when Russian did not like ping ping, something like that. A plot without highs and lows was not a good plot. A year without highs and lows was a difficult year to write a summary. The celebration ended at the beginning of the year, and he felt very happy. Now that I've started a podcast, I feel very happy. Moreover, the more I write, the happier I feel. Before this, I had already thought that this topic would definitely not be pleasing. Mecha, but in the end, there weren't many mecha fights in a million words. If it was interstellar, I would definitely not admit it. I don't have the ability to do architecture. If it was sci-fi, you can just kill me. I only admit that spy is a foreign land, but in fact, your divine eyes have already discovered it. What I want to write is just a story, but I can't find where to put the background, so I can only put it in a completely different world, but in essence it is exactly the same world. For this kind of irrelevant topic, I brace myself and start writing because I really like it, and I'm sure that I can fully immerse myself in it, but I've already prepared myself mentally. In the end, the response is still sloppy. There are more than 80,000 views, and it's still slowly increasing. You have to know that during the same period of the year, there probably wasn't much more. Excluding the selectivity of the topic, I find that I'm okay. It's still that old saying that isn't actually YD. I really have a long life. Although the number of friends reading this story is increasing slowly, it looks like it will also last. This brings me back to the first sigh. I'm really prepared to do this for the rest of my life, so I have to write every story full of love. I've always thought that if you're determined to do something for the rest of your life, then that's the attitude of a career. I've raised myself up again, and I'm starting to walk with a clatter. I'm an easily satisfied person. It's because of this happiness that it's hard to write a summary. My family, growth, and life since I was young were all this happy and sunny. It was a complete mess. Fate was made in heaven. Year after year, I can't find any bumps in my life. I forgot to mention that life in Mei and Qing was also very happy. This is the third summary, the change of life. Living in Qing, there are many things to do and worry about. In the past, I've mentioned this many times in my nonsense. Some of my reading friends are tired of it and think I'm being pretentious. I won't talk about it here. I just feel that when one reaches middle age, it's indeed easy to get tired. Two pairs of readers got to know each other through reading my books, and they fell in love. It's said that they're preparing to get married. This is very good. Perhaps there are other readers who have the same story, but I don't know. I'm just thinking that you can and should get married. That way, my book of achievements will forever be filled with glory. Fourth, this story. This is a good story, but there's a problem with my ability. I'm not being modest here. Everyone knows that I'm not a modest person, so I can't necessarily write it well. However, I will adhere to one principle, which is to evaluate myself. What I write every day must be worthy of the subscription price you pay. When I first started to write about Qin Yunian, I only knew how to clear water and not fill in the blank. Later, I realized that this was nonsense. Even if you don't want to fill in the blanks, there will still be times when you can't write and need to update. Intentionally or unintentionally, you'll still fill in the blank. It's just that. I firmly believe that the words I fill in, which describe feelings and emotions, although pure, can be sold for a little money. This brings me to another point. I'm not being modest. Recently, I've been feeling quite proud, especially in December. Other than going to Baotou halfway through, I've been messing around the rest of the time. In fact, this messing around started on the 23rd of last month. Such an intensive 3 updates a day is something that a lazy person like me has never thought of before. But what's really proud is that during the 3 updates a day, I actually didn't fill in the blanks at all. I didn't even fill in the blanks. I actually wrote better than before. This was confirmed in the emotional greetings sent by Comrade Xieyue, a female junior high school classmate of mine, and a few friends. If there's a problem with my self-perception, I think there shouldn't be too much of a problem with these guys' feelings. Does this mean that I really have potential to be tapped? I'm still young and haven't withered? 6th point, I finally started to report the account. Since July, I've been grateful for everyone's support and love. This is the first response summary. I'm not afraid. I promised everyone that there won't be any irresistible situation, and I'll never update again. Ru Chunxiang jumped up victoriously and screamed, "I did it! I did it! This is a very good attitude. I didn't write much. I'm indeed a lazy person, so I can only compare with myself. Fortunately, I've done what I promised you. That's enough." Speaking of this, I really want to say that I often spell in the group. I really admire the Tang family's 3rd young master. It's not his speed, but his endurance. He's a guy with a professional spirit. I really want to learn from him. December's accounts have also been cleared. There's about 10 or so days of 3 updates. That's it. Now I'll talk about the plan for next month and next year. Pay attention to it. 7th point. Looking forward to the future. To be honest, I definitely didn't write as much in January as I did this month. I'll be very busy until March, and again in May. As for whether I'll be busy in between, I really don't know. I promise to keep updating. I promise that when I have time, I'll write more and write more seriously. Then, this year, I'll give you the story of the spy so that you can pass the time, and also pass some time. From now on, the first 7 days will be double the monthly vote. I can only do what I said before. I don't dare to promise to explode, because the invincible state won't last forever. I'm not tired, but I'm not tired either. I just need to rest. But I still need to solicit monthly vote. This is also a very important part of the plan. Everyone knows what kind of person I am. I've been performing well recently. I'm very confident that I can squeeze everything out of everyone. Back to the 5th point, I'm not modest. Many people laugh and call me narcissistic, but you and I are both wrong. I don't have low self-esteem, but my mood is easily affected. It's easy for me to think that I'm a scumbag after introspection, so I need to constantly encourage myself to maintain some kind of confidence and drive. So I really need your encouragement. Recommendation votes are good. Subscriptions are even better. Monthly votes are the best. Yes, the purpose of this year's summary is to encourage myself, and I hope that the comrades reading this story will also encourage themselves. I discovered that in order to live a good life in this society that isn't absolutely perfect, this technique is extremely useful. What kind of person am I? I'm a great and hard-working fat man. Seeing that this annual summary is close to 3,000 words, sincere and full of literary talent, how can I not vote for the monthly vote? The first part of the summary was written very smoothly, but the last part about soliciting votes wasn't. Actually, the last part of the solicitation was just because I was a little unconvinced. I don't believe that soliciting votes has to be hot-blooded enough and have to be updated enough. I just haven't updated enough. I probably won't be hot-blooded for the rest of my life, but I'll pull a lot of monthly votes to see. TSK, I'm that kind of person who doesn't walk the normal path. Waha, I wish everyone a happy new year, healthy parents, and a happy life. I definitely don't have the energy to write more New Year's greetings. Chapter 405. I'm Jian, as in simple so-and-so. Su Lu stood in the shadows at the side of the stage, vigilantly watching his surroundings while listening to the 7 groups of reports from his headphones. His eyes were fixed on the graceful and charming girl on the stage, and his mood was gently swaying along with the lyrics that came out of her red lips. The simple so-and-so referred to Jian, or Jian Shuai. The simple lyrics were written by her personally. Although it seemed a little long and complicated, everyone knew that those lyrics were talking about her life, the bizarre 19 years of life of a national idol. Especially for Su Lu, whether it was the assassination in Linhai or the terrorist attack on the concert in Huanshan 4 states, even if he was not directly involved, he was deeply involved in these things, so he felt it more deeply. Jian Shuai sang this song on the stage for the first time. Su Lu looked at her quietly, thinking about the years that had passed. Only then did he realize that a girl's voice could be so low and fluctuating, and in the end, there was a trace of honesty and stubbornness. Thinking silently, the music gradually faded, the lights dimmed, and several military singers went on stage to perform. After the last break, Su Lu plugged in his headphones, hurriedly walked backstage to the electric downstairs, and held Jian Shuai's hand as they walked to the dressing room. The backstage of the concert was like a war. Half a minute later, Jian Shuai came out of the changing room. Su Lu, the only male in the room, couldn't help but stiffen slightly. His mouth was half open, and he was almost unable to speak because of that beautiful light. The last 3 songs of the concert were dynamic dance songs. Jian Shuai was wearing a very cool costume, unprecedentedly cool. The girl's purple hair was combed as smooth as a ray of light, and then tied up with a thin red ribbon, very eye-catching. The most important thing was that she was only wearing a very tight strapless dress with a white broadband belt around her waist. Her beautiful shoulders were exposed, and the close-fitting cut of the dress highlighted the girl's curve. And because of the low-cut design, one could even see the charming shadow between the 2 soft lumps of flesh. Jian Shuai was also very not used to this costume. With a trace of shyness, she covered her chest with her right hand, stuck out her tongue and said, "It's the first time I've dressed like this." With this small movement, the girl's playful and youthful sexiness gushed out of her body. Su Lu was a little embarrassed and lowered his head, only to find that the soft and tight red skirt was surprisingly short, revealing her slender legs. Su Lu was silent, thinking that if she went on stage and danced like this, wouldn't the soldiers see everything? Jian Shuai had always appeared in public with a healthy, fresh, and cute image. Now that Su Lu knew her family background, he naturally knew that this national girl didn't need to show her beautiful body, and probably no one would dare ask her to do so. It's hard to imagine what those soldiers will do when they return to camp tonight. Maybe it was because of the contrast between the noisy backstage and the quiet here, or maybe it was because the girl in front of him was charming and sexy enough to turn everyone upside down, which made Su Lu a little awkward. He actually said what was in his mind. He just didn't say that if the girl went on stage like this and exposed her body freely, it would definitely make countless people fantasize. This costume was not prepared by the performance team in advance, but by Jian Shuai after they went to the hospital and the cemetery that day. The girl bravely put down her right hand that was covering her body. Her cheeks were a little hot, and she opened her big eyes and said to Su Lu, "For the Federation, they stayed on this faraway planet for 2 years. You know, some of them are younger than me, maybe they haven't been in love before, they will die." Jian Shuai took a deep breath, and her short red skirt fluttered gently. She narrowed her eyes and said cutely, "If that's the case, isn't it good to make them happy? this beautiful and moving national girl was undoubtedly the most lustful object in the Federation. Wearing the poster of the warship's military officer uniform, who knew how many otakus and uncles would accompany her in the middle of the night when they were lonely? Not to mention, she was dressed so charmingly today, just like a little fairy. In fact, Sulu was also one of these people, so right now his face was a little hot. Sulu said to make them fantasize, and Jian Shuer said with her big eyes, "For the Federation, they stayed on this planet for 2 years, maybe they will die. These young people probably haven't even been in love before, so what's there to be afraid of? I don't even care if they lick me." Sulu blushed, thinking that she seemed to have done it before. In the strong rhythm of the dance music, accompanied by many dance groups, Jian Shuer appeared in the center of the stage in an unprecedentedly cool outfit. She held the standing microphone tightly with both hands, and her eyes were as clear as autumn water. She looked at the night sky and sang, and then she began to gently twist her body to the rhythm. Her movements were very smooth and seductive, but it had the unique innocence of a young girl. Regardless of whether it was her moving eyebrows or the slight movement of her waist, she did not deliberately reveal a trace of seductive gaze or body language. However, the young girl's peerlessly beautiful and inviolable face, coupled with this skin-tight short skirt that could kill eyeballs, the tens of thousands of Federation soldiers on the stage were first stunned, and then they were silent, and then a loud echo suddenly broke out. In the previous concert, most of the applause and cheers were heard, but now it turned into excited whistles. Sulu nervously watched her on the stage. That red miniskirt was made of extremely thin material, and it was extremely tight-fitting, making the girl's tight and enchanting legs look extremely seductive. The designer was not satisfied, and actually made a slit on both sides of the miniskirt. As the girl gently twisted, the dazzling spring scenery inside the miniskirt was faintly discernible. The whistles under the stage became crazier and crazier. The members of Group 7, who were responsible for the security work, were dumbfounded. The people of the performance team and the broadcasting team looked at the national girl on the stage, who they had never known before, and were completely shocked. Suli's mouth was dry. He really wanted to take off his black formal suit, rush to the stage, and tie it around her waist. However, what she said before had touched him. Just listening to the crazy reaction of the soldiers under the stage, he couldn't help but feel a little puzzled. Was this to rally the soldiers' hearts or to shake the soldiers' hearts? The youthful and playful little sex appeal on the stage was played to the extreme in the last song. When Jian Shuer, who changed into a dark Federation female officer uniform, appeared on the stage again, the little sex appeal had completely become a divine artifact that catalyzed male hormones. Everyone in the Federation saw her appear on the screen in this battleship commander uniform when she was 14 years old. This represented the collective memory of a generation. Today, the short skirt of the captain's military uniform was cut to its shortest length, and the top 2 buttons were undone. Only a military officer's scarf was casually draped over her fair skin. Her slightly messy purple hair was stuck to her moving cheeks because of the fragrant perspiration that seeped out from her perspiration. Still inexperienced, still shy, Jian Shuer forced herself to calmly release all the charm of a female captain. It turned out that this was the final climax of the concert. Sulu stared at this scene in a daze. He didn't notice that the thousands of fireworks behind the concert were once again lit up, and the pillars of light that created the crazy atmosphere began to sweep again. Countless fireworks exploded on the strategic boundary line between the north and south of Planet 5460. The electric control network on the front line of the Federation had been monitoring the missile base of the Empire, but the first to launch an attack in the dark was not the missile force of the Empire, but the 17 Empire armored regiments with the momentum of tigers and wolves. Armored vehicles and self-propelled heavy cannons poured ammunition without any regard for the cost. The dense and terrifying roar was absolutely not one after another, because there was absolutely no moment of interruption in the middle. The front line, which had been quiet for a long time, was like a hurricane. Once it landed, it began to show its terrifying power. On the boundary line between the north and south that stretched for 3,000 kilometers, countless clouds of smoke rose into the night sky. Before they could disperse, they were shattered by the second wave of attack. The loud explosions and blinding flashes were like fireworks in a concert, illuminating the entire sky. The high-speed Empire armored regiments and the even faster mecha squads shot out a soul-devouring and life-reaping rain of bullets from their cannons, madly sweeping the Federation's defense line. It was just that the light beams couldn't kill people, but the rain of bullets from the Imperial Expeditionary Force continued to destroy the Federation's defense line, reaping the lives of the Federation's soldiers. At the end of the 68th year of the constitutional calendar, Jian Shuer held a concert on Planet 5460 called Victory. The Imperial Expeditionary Force suddenly launched an all-out attack, charging towards the south with an indomitable momentum and terrifying firepower. It was as if they turned into 17 unstoppable sharp knives, stabbing straight towards the southern hemisphere. This planet, which hadn't had a large-scale war for a long time, finally began to tremble. The attack of the Imperial Expeditionary Force was like a hurricane. The moment it landed, it began to show its powerful destructive power without any hesitation. The Third War between the Federation and the Empire officially began because of a concert. The location of the Victory concert was in the Southern Hemisphere Federation's headquarters, which was still a long distance away from the location where the Imperial Expeditionary Force launched their attack. However, as soon as the concert ended, an ear-piercing air defense siren filled the sky. The soldiers, who were still immersed in the impact of Jian Shuer's uniform, suddenly had a serious expression on their faces. They woke up from their crazy emotions and quickly began to return to the camp, preparing for battle. The Federation's television station immediately cut off the broadcast signal, and Jian Shuer, who had just walked off the stage, was surrounded by 7 groups of armed personnel, beginning to prepare to evacuate. Unlike the soldiers, most of the people in this team were civilians. Hearing the ear-piercing siren, they were naturally terrified. An officer quickly arranged the evacuation matters while comforting everyone. The first wave of medium-range missiles launched by the Empire has been intercepted by the Waigwa system. The military fleet has been dispatched. Please don't panic. Lieutenant Colonel Su Lu. A major general walked over with a serious face, handed over an electronic document, and said, "This is the secret mission given to you by the Ministry of National Defense." Su Li's heart sank slightly. He knew that things had finally come. I originally planned to write about the concert briefly, but as I wrote, I didn't want to stop, because I wanted to see Jian Shuer wearing those 2 cool and sexy clothes. I'm actually a little excited. Forgive me, the next chapter will be a little later. Chapter 406. Su Lu looked at the top-secret military electronic order and narrowed his eyes. All the questions he had after receiving the mission from the headquarters of Whitewater Company a few months ago were partially answered by this document. Since the Victory concert was a small part of this large-scale military operation, it made sense for him and Group 7 to be in charge of security. Therefore, he didn't ask any boring questions like whether or not he could accept the mission. Instead, he asked the Major General, "We only need to send Jian Shuer to the warship, and the mission is considered over?" The Federation's Major General couldn't be young. A Major General under 40 like Du Shaoqing was extremely rare. The Major General in front of him was around 50 years old. His expression was cold, and he wasn't very polite to Su Lu. He said in a deep voice, "What you need to do now is to execute, not ask. The headquarters will send a reinforced battalion to escort you to Zichou Airport. You need to leave immediately." Su Lu nodded silently and looked around. Although the headquarters couldn't hear the explosions at the front line, they could faintly smell the smoke and feel the pressure of the Imperial Expeditionary Force's large-scale attack. The members of Group 7 were already prepared to depart. Jian Shuer's team was also waiting to depart. In this tense moment, everyone's movements seemed to be countless times faster than usual. After all, if they stayed here any longer, no one knew if a missile would fall on their heads in the next second. The general said in a deep voice, "Let's go. I will personally accompany you." Su Lu knew Jian Shuer's identity, so he was not surprised by the Major General's words. He narrowed his eyes and looked at the figures around him in the dark. After confirming that the military had sent an entire mechanical division to protect them, he was slightly relieved. He turned around and held Jian Shuer's hand, and quickly walked to the black car. After getting into the car, he turned on the car's radar and main control system as fast as he could. At the same time, he put on his sunglasses and said in his mind, "Old man, watch the road for me." After getting in touch with the Federal Central Computer, Su Li's mood became calmer. He didn't see the impending crisis as terrifying. Accompanied by pungent exhaust fumes, a fleet of military vehicles using compound power roared out of the base camp in the dark night and quickly advanced toward the Zichou spaceport in the southwest direction. A light battleship of the Federation was already ready to take off there, waiting to escort Jian Shuer and her team away from this terrifying planet that was already covered in a sea of fire and craggy stars. Su Lu controlled the steering wheel and drove the black car, leading his subordinates' motorcade. Under the protection of an entire battalion, they quickly advanced along the road. The temperature in the car had not immediately risen. Through the rear-view hologram, he looked at the girl curled up in the chair behind him. He neatly took off his black summer coat and threw it over, saying, "Wear this, don't catch a cold." Jian Shuer, who didn't have time to change her clothes, was still wearing the extremely short and cool captain's uniform. She didn't know if it was because of the cold, or because she was frightened, or because she still hadn't shaken off the mood of the concert, but her cheeks and ears were slightly red. She took the coat that had Su Li's scent and silently put it on. The Imperial Expeditionary Force's attack was extremely fierce. The motorcade that was preparing to leave the planet was silent. Only the car's communication system rang from time to time with the command center's battle situation through the surface radio. Although the Imperial Army's speed was fast, under the resistance of the Federation's defense line, there was no way to stop the motorcade's advance. Through the old man, Su Lu had learned about the specifics of the battle earlier than anyone else in the convoy. He narrowed his eyes and silently looked at the military vehicles and the soldiers in the vehicles. He suddenly confirmed one thing: the target of the Empire's people should be the girl behind him. 30 kilometers away from Zichou Airport, there was a branch intersection. There was still silence in the black car, but Su Li's face suddenly became extremely ugly. "What's wrong?" Jian Shuer had been carefully observing his expression and asked softly. Su Lu didn't answer. What answered Jian Shuer was the military's urgent notification in the system. Zichou Airport was raided by the Empire's fleet. The warships were seriously damaged and unable to take off. The landing platforms were completely destroyed. The battle damage is being assessed. In the dark night, the long motorcade stopped because of this unexpected situation. After 2 seconds of absolute silence, the Major General's cold and unquestionable voice came from the system. According to the backup plan, the motorcade will turn to Luoqiu Airport. Most of the vehicles in the motorcade began to roar again, preparing to turn to the right side. However, the 7 military vehicles of the 7th Group were like silent stones, stopping on the right side of the road. They didn't have the intention to set off, because the black car had been silent and still. The Major General's angry voice sounded. "Lieutenant Colonel Su, why don't you start immediately?" Su Lu held the steering wheel with both hands and narrowed his eyes. He looked at the determined but still young faces of the soldiers in the military vehicles in front of him and suddenly asked, "You know you are bait?" He didn't use the communication system, so this sentence was naturally directed to Jian Shuer. The girl tightened the clothes on her body, as if she was a little afraid of the cold, and gently nodded. Sulu was silent for a few seconds, pressed the earpiece in his ear, and said to everyone, "I have a different opinion. The north-south boundary of Planet 5460 was not the actual defense line. Between the defense positions of the Federation and the Empire, there was a buffer zone of about 120 kilometers wide. Therefore, when the Imperial Expeditionary Force fiercely advanced southward, the plains and hills in front of them did not suffer any powerful counterattacks at all. The Imperial Expeditionary Force with the black hibiscus flying military flag was like countless vicious beasts that had been hungry and thirsty for many years. They greedily and stubbornly pounced toward the water source. The mixed brigade of heavy armor and Moon Wolf mecha turned into a black torrent, coldly but fanatically crushing line after line of defense. Accompanied by flames that soared into the sky and destruction all over the ground, they continued southward, and continued southward. The federal military had long been mentally prepared for the surprise attack of the Imperium's expeditionary army. However, they still did not expect that the Imperium's expeditionary army would actually launch an attack with all its members. This was definitely not a surprise attack, but a full-scale push that was close to staking everything on a single throw. He Zi was a company commander of the Xiaji Mountain Defense Position. Covered in dust, he pushed away the corpses of his orderlies in front of him and shouted into the communication device with a hoarse voice, "We need backup, we need backup." His orderlies died in the previous intensive airstrikes of the Imperial Expeditionary Force, and the micro-drones of the Empire buzzing above his head were like troublesome locusts, constantly interfering with the Federal Army's wireless communication. The ground began to shake. He Zi's eyes were red as he looked at the countless armored vehicles that appeared on the hill. He helplessly put down the communication device in his hand, and then a fierce expression appeared on his face. He walked in front of the main cannon of the Gongzi and said to the cannoneer in a deep voice, "The mecha reinforcements are still 12 kilometers away, now it's up to you." From the company commander to the normal soldiers, looking at the Empire's armored vehicles and the ferocious black mechas that covered the hill, they already knew that they could not hold this line of defense, but they did not have the slightest bit of fear in their hearts. Even if they did not show it on their angry and twisted faces. The Gongzi's main cannon under the control of the company's cannoneer team shook violently, and beautiful cannon fire spewed out in a straight line. With a loud boom, one of the Empire's armored vehicles exploded into pieces under the unstoppable attack. Meanwhile, the armored vehicle behind it was also flipped over by this blast and fell heavily to the ground, almost smashing into a Moon Wolf mecha with a ghostly figure, turning it into several tons of black dirt. Electronic interference, virtual bait, dazzling artillery fire, high-speed chariots, and strange mechas formed a thrilling scene in this valley. A black shadow flashed past, and the heavy Moon Wolf mecha successfully avoided the cannon fire of the Federation's position and rushed up the hill. Company Commander He Zi hugged the heavy carbine machine and shouted as he pulled the trigger on the mecha that was close to him. Beautiful bullets spewed out, and countless dull sounds of metal splashing rang out. However, it was all in vain. The Empire's Moon Wolf mecha stepped heavily on his body, and at the same time, its right mechanical arm stabbed out with an alloy blade, ruthlessly stabbing into the weakest part of the Gongzi's main cannon. Under the heavy and huge mecha, the dull sound of heavy machinery still rang out, but after a short moment it abruptly stopped. The Black Moon Wolf mecha did not stop at all, and continued to move silently towards the south, where there were still scattered resistance. Behind it, the Empire's armored soldiers surged past, leaving behind countless ruins and corpses all over the ground. Countless similar scenes played out in the valley and plains of this planet. The bloody and cruel war did not give people the time to reflect on its characteristics, and it had already brought death and defeat. The Federation's headquarters located in the base was busy, whether it was the lieutenant commander or the officers who were monitoring the movements of the Imperial Expeditionary Force through the electronic monitoring network, sending specific battlefield data to the various troops. Their expressions were exceptionally heavy and ugly. Since yesterday, the Federation's planetary headquarters had raised the defense level of the front line to the highest level. The highest-ranking officers had long guessed the Imperial Expeditionary Force's plan, but who would have thought that, under the premise of sufficient preparation, the Imperial Expeditionary Force would still advance so fiercely and so quickly? Are the people of the Empire crazy? They actually took out all of their assets. What is Umburi planning? The Federation's frontline commander, Lieutenant General Nelson, looked at the battle situation screen with a pale face, looking at the direction of the light that made him feel endless anger and humiliation, and he slammed the table heavily and shouted, "Inform Hong Yujing to immediately suppress the defense line behind Mount Xiaji. We must not let the enemy break through. Commander, the fleet must first ensure the safety of the spaceport," a staff officer reminded him worriedly. "I understand," Lieutenant General Nelson slowly calmed down and said, "but she will also understand." The federal military had always thought that the military leader of the Imperial Expeditionary Force in the north, old General Umburi, was only using this seemingly exaggerated full-scale attack to cover up a certain 1,000-mile surprise attack that they were determined to win. However, the reality was not so. The Imperial general with deep military wisdom, after accepting the Emperor's random order, actually found a way out of the impossible. He used a full-scale attack to cover up the 1,000-mile surprise attack, but wasn't he also using that surprise attack to cover up this decisive and terrifying full-scale attack? The Federal Army was very likely to fall into a situation where they could only focus on one thing and lose the other. The previous chapter was really difficult to write because I didn't know how to write that, but it can be considered a small climax. In my anxiety, I actually left a few dozen words of outline in the main text, but this also proves that this story was carefully thought out. Please forgive me. Chapter 407. There was a line between the north and south of Planet 5460. This line originally only existed on military map. Other than the fortifications hidden in the mountains and high-strength cement buildings, this line did not have any obvious markings. However, on this night, countless explosions, smoke clouds, and light clearly outlined this line. The Imperial Expeditionary Force's attack spread out on 2/3 of the circular line. Most of the attacks were concentrated in the night area. The dense flames rang out against the black background, appearing particularly dazzling. It was as if a god had tied a beautiful belt around the waist of this planet. The belt was decorated with sparkling rubies. Every shining ruby represented a violent explosion. The Federation's light feather fleet looked down on this scene from high above. They gracefully turned around in space, and the bow of the ship lowered, rushing down toward the belt that was filled with the will of death and blood. Countless missiles from both the north and south rose into the air. In the dark side of the planet, they drew out slender and mesmerizing rays of light. After the Federation's space fleet released the first batch of all-terrain fighters, they maintained a close distance. They did not dare to get too close to the atmosphere. The bow of the ship slowly adjusted. The inside of the 7 battleships began to emit a low but powerful roar. The light became dim. The huge energy output by the crystal multi-engine began to move toward the main cannon base according to the established channel. Main cannon ready to fire. Main cannon in position. Major General Hong Yujing looked at the light screen in front of her. She raised her right hand and said calmly, "Expand the O-shaped radius by 700%. The adjutant was stunned. "The lethality will be reduced by a lot. What we need is to help the ground forces get through this most difficult period." Major General Hong Yujing lowered her eyes and said, "The most important thing is the lethality area. Even if we blast the opponent's mecha into smoke, what effect will it have on the overall situation?" No one said anything else. In the current situation where crystal mines were scarce, the fleet that should have been the most terrifying force in the universe had an innate sorrow. The battleships had a huge power that the ground forces could not resist, but they did not have enough energy to support it and turn this power into victory. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 fire. The countdown for the Federal fleet's main cannon ended. The battleships floating in the dark side of the planet instantly entered some kind of absolute stillness. In addition to the palpitating silence in the universe, it was as if the entire world had stopped moving. More than 10 pillars of light shot out from the bases of the 7 warships. These beams of light looked so slender and delicate. They were silent, like flashlights shining into a lake. They gently passed through the planet's dark atmosphere and landed on the surface. The beam of light, which appeared to be thin in space, had expanded to an area of thousands of square meters when it landed on the ground. The sound finally rang out. Countless heavy-duty armored vehicles and Moon Wolf mechas from the Empire instantly exploded, overturned, and disintegrated into countless broken metal components, splashing in all directions under the punishment white light that descended from the sky. In order to expand the attack area, the Federal fleet deliberately increased the area and reduced the degree of damage. If it was just to accurately hit a target, there would definitely be a lot of terrifying scenes of the Empire's heavy equipment being vaporized on planet 5460. Just like that time in the outskirts of the capital of Heshi State in the Donglin region, the beam of light that descended from the sky instantly turned the black M-52 mecha controlled by Fengyu into a puff of green smoke. Because of the Federal fleet's attack, the beautiful belt on the planet instantly bloomed with 10 light clusters. The ruby-shaped explosion clusters that represented the fierce ground attack were instantly overshadowed by these light pillars that descended from the sky. Report from the command center: the effect of the outer layer attack is very significant. The excited voices of the Federation staff officers sounded in the battleship. They waved their fists in the air and looked at the images on the ground transmitted from the satellite. They looked at the huge gaps that were forcefully blasted open by the battleships of the Imperial Expeditionary Force and the charred metal debris that sputtered around the gap. They were so excited that they couldn't control themselves. The fierce attack of the 17 armored regiments of the Imperial Expeditionary Force was severely hindered under the precise attack of the Federation's space fleet. At that moment, the battle had already entered the second line of defense of the Federation. The Federal Army finally managed to block the continuous attacks of the Imperial Expeditionary Force with the help of powerful defensive firepower. Countless heavy armor units of the Empire were destroyed in the valleys and plains. Countless Moon Wolf mechas were hit by the electromagnetic missiles of the fighter jet. Their bodies flashed with a terrifying blue light as they were forced to fall. Then, the small teams of the Federation attacked the infantrymen. They used shoulder-fired rocket launchers to bombard the infantrymen non-stop. At the same time, the sturdy defense of the Federation also suffered a fierce attack that they had never experienced in the past 10 years. The fearless Imperial Expeditionary Force used all of their missiles and main cannons to continuously overturn the high-strength cement walls. Tens of thousands of tons of soil were continuously thrown into the air. The concentrated bullets hit any protruding objects on the surface of the ground, making horrible sound. Who knew how many soldiers were turned into dust under this kind of firepower? The 3 mecha brigades will be here soon. The second wave of attack from the missile base is ready. Major General Hong Yujing frowned as she looked at the markings on the screen. She confirmed that the fleet had already helped the command center stabilize the situation. Although the attacks of the Empire were still as terrifying as ever, with the follow-up forces of the Federation catching up, they could at least hold the third line of defense. Right at that moment, the radar system of the light feather battleship suddenly emitted a sharp alarm. The quiet space was still quiet. There were no signs of the enemy. Why did the alarm sound? Major General Hong Yujing quickly walked back to her seat. Her expression was abnormally cold. She said to the entire fleet, "Electronic interference detected. Everyone retreat. Leave the atmosphere immediately and enter the distant space." This Federation captain's reaction was not slow. However, although the 7 battleships that had just fired their main cannons did not need to undergo emergency cooling, the reactivation of their multi-crystal engines still required 10 seconds. However, right at the 7th second, in the space above the Federal fleet at an angle of 345 degrees, a wolf's head with a metallic luster appeared. The wolf's head seemed slow, but in reality, it was extremely fast. Only after leaving the ionization cloud's concealment could one see clearly that it was the head of a black battleship. Gradually, 1, 2, 3, a total of 17 Empire Night Wolf-class battleships appeared in the upper half of the Federal fleet's airspace. They rapidly pressed down. The Expeditionary Army's only Empire Royal Fleet. Why would they appear here? Major General Hong Yujing's right hand was tightly clenched. She was extremely shocked, but her face did not reveal any emotion. She quickly and clearly issued a high-speed evacuation order to the entire fleet. Right now, the Federal fleet was in near-Earth space. Facing the Empire's fleet tens of thousands of kilometers away, countless of them made effective evasive maneuvers. Although the offensive ability of the Empire's battleships was far inferior to the Federal fleet's, Major General Hong Yujing knew that in front of these beasts of the Empire that even dared to engage in space collisions and perish together, if they did not immediately leave the near-Earth space and rely on the Federal fleet's high speed to enter outer space, her own fleet would very likely be dragged into the Empire's battleships and perish together. The overflow of the number 3 furnace's number 2 furnace is at 8%. Fleet, form the Kimura formation. Hurry! Urgent shouts rang out from the Federal fleet. In the silent space, the 2 fleets unexpectedly encountered each other, but neither launched an attack first. They only raised their speed to the maximum and began to chase after each other. The reason the Empire's fleet did not launch an attack was very simple. The crude main cannons of their battleships, in the large-scale space environment, even if they hit the Federation's battleships, would not immediately cause real damage to the Federation's super-thick alloy armor. The reason the Federal fleet did not launch an attack was that the energy quota of the battleships was seriously insufficient. They had to save the energy that was not used to maintain the operation of the battleships for the most critical moment. The Federal fleet had the advantage of speed, but the Empire's fleet that should never appear here had the advantage of numbers and positioning. The timing of the appearance of the Night Wolf fleet was especially perfect. The Federal fleet's main cannons had just been fired and were still in the near-Earth space. The silent chase was an extremely dangerous chase. If the Federal fleet was really closed in by the enemy, then they would certainly blossom into a cluster of fireworks above the planet. Break away from the Level 1 gravitational interference. The command and control system of the Light Feather-class battleship issued a timely voice. The soldiers of the Federal fleet that had been silent and tense for 3 minutes all breathed a sigh of relief at the same time. They subconsciously wiped the cold sweat on their foreheads. As long as they left the near-Earth space, with the speed of the Empire's fleet, there was no way they could catch up with them. Continue to break away from the Level 2 gravitational interference. However, Major General Hong Yujing did not relax. Her eyes were as sharp as knives as she stared coldly at the light screen. Looking at the Night Wolf fleet of the Empire that was changing their formation, she knew that the enemy would definitely not let her go. The situation was still dangerous. 7 Empire's battleships have left. The deputy commander shouted in shock. What are they trying to do? Are they trying to die? General, I suggest that we immediately release the battleships and launch a sniper attack against the enemy. What are they trying to do? Major General Hong Yujing looked at the Empire's fleet that was changing their formation 100,000 kilometers away. Her heart was heavy. Suddenly, she said in a cold voice, "Inform the ground command that the Empire's fleet is heading toward Zaiqiu spaceport." Hearing this, the Federation officers that were busy in the command hall froze at the same time. They turned around and looked at her in disbelief. "Inform the ground command that our fleet has been forced to leave the near-Earth space and is in a state of entanglement with the enemy. We can't support the spaceport. Tell them to prepare to face the enemy." Major General Hong Yujing slowly lowered her head and said softly, "Or retreat." The head of the Empire's Night Wolf battleships was a wolf's head with a metallic luster. It definitely did not fit the design concept of space combat, but it was the nightmare of countless Federation battleships. This was because the Empire's people who were not afraid of death would often use this wolf's head to play the game of perishing together with the enemy. The commander of the Night Wolf fleet, Fu Ding, looked at the surface that was getting closer and closer. He said calmly, "Attack the spaceport, release the battleships, and open up a path for the mecha team. Our goal is to capture Jian Shuer alive for His Majesty." The Night Wolf fleet appeared like a ghost. They only used 2 changes of speed to successfully force the Federal fleet into outer space. It had to be said that this commander's commanding skills had already reached the realm of perfection. Normal tactics, just because of his perfect grasp of timing, brought the dawn of victory to the Empire. He rubbed his blonde curly hair and looked at the planet's night zone that was filled with flames. He smiled and said, "My fleet is not here to be a guest." Chapter 408. There was no moon in Planet 5460. The side of the sky facing away from the star was only filled with stars. The night here was very quiet, as dark as ink. But tonight, the sound of explosions on the planet never stopped. The edge of the dark wilderness that stretched into the distance lit up from time to time. It looked like lightning, but in fact, it was countless advanced weapons releasing their energy, lighting up half of the sky. The same was true at Luoqiu spaceport. The sound of explosions and light were even more intense. The Imperial Royal Fleet that quietly came to the rescue of Planet 5460 began to waste their energy from the edge of the atmosphere. One of the largest spaceports in the Federation had fallen into a sea of fire. The fleet named Night Wolves did not take advantage of the situation to attack Luoqiu spaceport further away. Just like in the ancient wars of the Empire, the blonde commander firmly implemented the policy of encirclement. In addition to the bombardment of the main artillery, the attack on the spaceport relied more on the fighters released by the fleet. Hundreds of black all-terrain fighters could be faintly seen in the night. Like tiny black mosquitoes, they moved swiftly between the anti-air artillery and the rapidly sweeping illuminating lamp posts on the Federation's ground. From time to time, a fighter would be tragically hit by a missile, dragging a long tail of light as it tragically plunged to the ground. However, even if they were hit, the fighter pilots of the Imperial fleet still incomparably valiantly controlled the fighter to fall toward the command center of Luoqiu spaceport, using their own deaths to deal the final damage to the Federal Army. These Imperial pilots did not parachute. The Federal military on the ground was not surprised by this desperate attack, because in their battlefield experience, the people of the Empire had always been this kind of lunatic who did not care about their lives. The fighter groups of the Federation had already taken to the air and launched an attack in just a few minutes. In the night sky in the southwest direction, the sharp sound of air turbulence and fireworks like explosions rang out from time to time. 30 kilometers away, the spaceport road was very quiet. The long convoy stopped silently on the side of the road. People watched the war and the tragic situation at the spaceport. No one was willing to speak, especially now that there seemed to be some kind of disagreement within the team. This is the backup plan of the Ministry of Defense. Your opinion is reserved. The Major General ran out of the black car and shouted angrily at Su Lu, "Hurry up! What are you still doing here?" Su Lu turned off the electronic map on the car's central control system. He held the steering wheel with both hands and remained silent for a second. He turned around and said something to Jian Shuer. He then opened the car door and stood on the cement road. He said to the Major General, "If we're going to Luoqiu Airport, I don't think we need to go with so many people." The battle on the planet's surface had already broken out. Su Lu already knew what the federal military wanted to do. Although he did not understand why the military was so sure that Jian Shuer was attractive to the Empire, he was sure that Jian Shuer was the bait, and he, Group 7, and the entire battalion of soldiers would encounter unprecedented danger on their way to Luoqiu spaceport. He knew very well that his identity was a military officer that had to obey orders. However, he could not watch the entire mechanical division fall into the encirclement of the Imperial Expeditionary Force just to protect himself and Jian Shuer. He was still wearing the sunglasses on the bridge of his nose. No one knew that his left pupil was slightly narrowed at this moment. He was communicating with the old man. From the attack on Luoqiu spaceport and the direction of the Imperial Expeditionary Force's attack, the Empire was very clear about Jian Shuer's location. The old man only used a very short amount of time to find out that the signal interruption station of the Federation TV station was probably hacked by the Empire's electronic forces. However, at this moment, countless miniature surveillance aircraft of the Empire covered the southern hemisphere sky like a flock of birds. In a short amount of time, the federal military could not eliminate all of them. However, these troublesome little things designed by the Empire's scientists to break through the glory of the Charter, combined with the Empire's military satellites that were forcefully changing their orbits, could accurately find the target they were looking for. The Federation's electronic surveillance network in the southern hemisphere was only 40% complete. There was no way to completely block this fleeing convoy in this tense moment. We all know what the plan of the Ministry of National Defense is. In that case, I'll take Jian Shuer there. Su Lu took off his sunglasses and said to the general. Then he turned around and gave an order to Group 7's subordinate. Gu Shifeng, get ready to warm up. Gu Shifeng, who was an expert in data processing, paused for a moment. She put the Kayan light machine gun in front of her behind her back and quickly ran to the heavy multi-axle truck behind the black car. She jumped onto the truck and turned on the electronic valve. A low humming sound came from the truck. At the same time, the top of the truck began to move to the side. "What are you doing?" A trace of anger appeared in the eyes of the Major General. He moved closer to him and said hurriedly, "Who do you think you are? Without the protection of the mechanical division, do you think you can take Miss to Luoqiu safely? Are you out of your mind?" Hearing the word Miss, Su Lu was even more certain that this Major General must be a direct subordinate of the Feiqing faction. At this point, everyone was very clear about the dangers ahead and the real intention of the military to use them as bait. "I insist on my opinion." Su Lu took 2 steps back and opened the back door of the black car. He took Jian Shuer out and said in a low voice, "The military can ignore the lives of these hundreds of soldiers, but they can't just watch this happen. The most important thing is, I think that if I take Miss Jian Shuer away alone, I have a higher chance of success." At this moment, time was very urgent. The Major General's face was extremely ugly. He grabbed Su Li's vest and said in a low voice, "Bulsh *T. Do you know how big of a risk the department took to come up with this plan? If Miss gets hurt, how will the entire Department of Defense answer to this? I personally brought the strongest battalion to escort you there, and I don't even have the slightest chance of success. How dare you say you have the slightest chance of success?" Su Lu was not blinded by personal heroism, but his engineer's logic told him that on this planet that was already filled with the flames of war, taking Jian Shuer away alone was the best choice. The MX mecha on the truck had already finished heating up. Under the protection of the glory of the charter, he firmly believed that no matter how strong the Empire was, no matter how far-sighted their plans were, they would not be able to stop him. An MX mecha was naturally useless against the terrifying attacks of the Empire, but it was an unparalleled weapon when used to escape. As a general, I order you to get in the car and leave immediately. The Major General reprimanded angrily. Sulu allowed the Major to grab his shirt. He lowered his head to look at the time and said, "In the electronic secret order you showed me earlier, I am the one with the highest authority for this plan. The fact that the Department of Defense gave me this mecha means that the old man already guessed what I would choose." He took Jian Shuer's hand and said with certainty. He cared about the life and death of this battalion of soldiers, but the generals in the command center cared more about Jian Shuer's life and death. This did not mean that the Federation and the old man were cold-blooded, but it was the natural reaction of the people who commanded the war. The general's arm stiffened. "Do you think that you alone are stronger than an entire mecha division? Lieutenant Colonel Sulu, wake up." Sulu ignored him. He held Jian Shuer's hand and walked towards the heavy-duty truck. The young girl who was being held by Sulu remained silent, obediently not saying a word. She let Sulu handle everything, but there was a hint of curiosity and shock in her large eyes. "Bai Yulan, bring the box over." When they walked past the military vehicles of Team 7, Sulu looked at the handsome man beside the car and said. Bai Yulan frowned and threw the cigarette butt in his hand onto the road. He had already vaguely guessed something, but he was not willing to let Sulu take the risk alone. The entire Team 7 did not want this guy to be some stupid hero. Seeing Bai Yulan's hesitation, Sulu glared at him angrily and said loudly, "Bring it over!" The non-combatants were still in the vehicles, watching the fierce battle in the southwest direction with their bodies trembling. The Team 7 combatants and an entire battalion of soldiers had already gotten out of the vehicles. They looked at the young man and woman who were climbing onto the heavy-duty truck with complicated eyes. The general in charge of this plan looked at this scene with a gloomy face. It seemed that he had not decided whether to stop or not. The roof of the heavy-duty multi-axle truck had been opened. A black MX mech in a moving state was like a sleeping steel giant, waiting to be awakened by its master. Accompanied by a soft but incomparably familiar hydraulic sound, the cockpit door at the chest of the mech opened. Sulu threw the black box inside and stepped on the protruding metal platform. He turned around and extended his right hand to the girl below. He asked, "You know very well that there are two paths. Returning to the command center is naturally safe. If we want to go to Luoqiu Airport, there are only the two of us. Without a doubt, this is a risk. Do you want to take the risk with me?" Jian Shuer raised her head and looked at Su Li's slightly narrowed eyes. Suddenly, she found that the young man standing on the black mech's originally ordinary face had become more attractive. Without hesitation, she reached out her soft little hand with a smile and placed it in Su Li's hand. There was a flurry of gunfire. The signal relay vehicle of the Federation TV station was blasted into a pile of debris. Xiong Linquan looked at his masterpiece with satisfaction. He lifted the heavy Dahlin machine that was still spinning at high speed and turned back to salute the leader of the truck. Sitting in the cockpit of the mech, Sulu completed the final self-check of the MX mech with a calm expression. Before he closed the hatch, he suddenly said to the young girl squeezed beside him, who was as obedient as a cat, "The people of the Empire want to capture you. They must be watching you from the sky right now. Aren't you going to say hello?" Jian Shuer widened her eyes and finally could not help but burst out laughing. She supported herself on his shoulder and stood up. Then, she waved her hand at the starry sky in the cockpit of the mecha. The alloy hatch closed. The multiple engines at the waist of the black MX mech instantly started up. The powerful output made the air begin to ripple. The soldiers in the cockpit all had different expressions, but they were all silent. They felt the heavy pressure from the heavy-duty multi-axle truck to the ground. They felt extremely nervous. With a muffled bang, the heavy-duty truck with an astonishing load was like a falling-apart building. Its tires burst and dust flew everywhere. It crashed heavily onto the hard surface of the road. Chapter 409. Let me first explain a little about the plot. The previous chapter's name wasn't originally this. The original chapter's name was cooler, but when I uploaded it, I suddenly remembered Sakai Noriko's song. The sentence that left the deepest impression on me was, "For you, I want to take risk." So I used that as the chapter's name. Back to Jian Shuer's concert. The first song I wrote for her was from Su Jiaying's album. I changed the birthday gift to a New Year gift because it was written on the 31st. The second song, Jian So-and-so, was obviously written on the spot after listening to Tan Weiwei's song that night. Lyrics aren't difficult to write. Although this song was poorly written, it was because I wrote it in one breath. I didn't change the lyrics at all. Tan was actually quite interesting, but when Weiwei sang Old Shui's song, it felt wrong. When Yuan Weiren sang it, it was even more wrong. I didn't look at Kangxi, the leader looked at it, I took a few glances. If a friend wants to ask me to write lyrics and get royalties, feel free to look for me. I'm actually the most confident when it comes to writing lyrics. When I listened to Do Wei more than 10 years ago, I was determined not to look at the lyric. I thought it was very beautiful, but when I looked at the lyrics, I thought, it should be better, right? So I wrote a few songs at that time. I'm really confident in this aspect, but I never had the chance to show it. In my next book, I might write a lot of lyrics and then indicate the copyright. Can I satisfy my fascination with the literary circle? Finally, I'll start soliciting votes. It's said that I can only write in the middle of the night. It's true, but this isn't a good thing. I've made you wait for a long time. Recently, I've been really busy. Last month, there were more than 10 days before the third Watt. Now, when the monthly votes are doubled, I can't come out. This is really sad, but everyone can understand. It's not that I don't want to write more votes, but I really don't have the time. The summary was wrong. I didn't write much, and the monthly votes did rise slowly. But Xiao So-and-so was still resentful of being left behind, overtaken, so I didn't get tired of it and continued to work hard to sincerely call on everyone to vote for me. You know that I'm very diligent now. When I have time, I'll naturally show my diligence to prove your approval. At this time, I'm asking for your vote. Thank you very much. Chapter 410. In the distant night sky, dazzling flames flashed. More than 500 soldiers of the Federation sat on their respective armored vehicles, looking into the distance with a trace of admiration and worry, looking at a certain place where the black Mecca had disappeared in the distance. The mechanical division aimed at the heavy truck with the howitzers and more powerful weapons. Because the truck suddenly collapsed and the target left at high speed, they naturally stopped firing. The white-haired Major General stood in the middle of the road with a complicated expression. After a difficult struggle, he finally didn't order his subordinates to use force to stop the reckless Su Lo. Connect me to the command center. No, connect me to the Ministry of Defense. He quickly walked to the military vehicle and asked the adjutant to connect the military satellite phone. He roared angrily, "Tell Zhou that brat kidnapped the young miss. If anything happens to the young miss, I will hold him responsible." The men of Group 7 carried their heavy weapons and began to prepare to leave with heavy expressions. Bai Yulan's delicate eyebrows were tightly knitted together. She exchanged a look with Lan Xiaolong beside her, but in the end, they didn't say anything. Their mission this time was to protect Jian Shuer, and they had to protect Su Lo. But now, the two people they were supposed to protect had abandoned them. In the shortest amount of time, 30 kilometers northeast of Zaiqiu Spaceport, what happened on the quiet road was transmitted to the 5460 Federation Command Center and the Federal Fleet in space. Major General Hong Yujing slowly took off her military cap and used her fingers to comb her hair. She wasn't very worried about the 7 Night Wolf battleship. The fleet under her command was about to leave the second gravitational range. At that time, no matter how fearless the Empire's battleships were, they wouldn't be able to threaten her fleet. The most important part of the plan this time seemed to have undergone some changes. In the Southern Hemisphere Command Base, Lieutenant General Nelson listened to the battle report with a serious expression. After a moment of silence, he said, "Help that mecha take care of the threat from the air. The problem on the ground can only be left to that young man. The remaining time of the electronic interference and the time it takes for the Federation to clean up those little things must be calculated immediately." In the circular base of the Imperium's expedition army in the Northern Hemisphere, inside the spacious underground command hall, more than 40 large light beams were displaying the images of countless cruel and heroic battles at night in the south. Without the help of near-orbit satellites in the Southern Hemisphere, the electronic surveillance of the Imperium's army mostly relied on the mini-unmanned electronically controlled aircraft that they called Little Things. Therefore, the images were often distorted and blurred. The Federation has already shot down 2 of the 3 orbit-changing satellites. After the Norman officer gave the order to the computer, he picked up the phone and shouted to the electronic troops in the distance, "No matter what the results of the calculation are, the electronic interference 32 degrees to the south, you must hold." He put down the phone and unfastened the top button of his military uniform in annoyance. This was because he knew very well that the electronic troops that sneaked along the valley to the demarcation line were actually taking a huge risk. The Federation would definitely choose them as the main target. No one knew how long the advantage in electronic warfare would last. The battle started in the middle of the night. The Imperial armies attacked the south with irresistible force. This was because the Imperial military headquarters went beyond the Federation's expectations. At the very beginning of the battle, they threw all their resources at the southern defensive position. The weapons and the soldiers' willpower that they had been accumulating for 10 years surged out in an instant, catching the Federation off guard. In the words of the Expeditionary Forces commander, Old General Ambley, in front of a righteous army, any conspiracy would be crushed into powder by the Empire's iron stream before it could ferment. However, when the Empire's armored torrent attacked the middle area between the second and third defensive line in the Southern Hemisphere, the advantage of the Federal Army's weapons began to gradually reveal itself. This was especially so when the Empire's powerful and precise counterattack was deployed. This made the Imperial officers in the base feel a little worried. After the initial defeat, the Federal Army was actually able to accept the fact so quickly and methodically strengthen their defense and even organize a counterattack. This only proved that they were a little scared by the violent offensive of the Imperial armies in the beginning. However, secretly, the Federal Army was already prepared. The only orbit-changing satellite that survived the Federation's attack sent back another critical image. The Norman officer's dark blue eyes flashed with a trace of coldness. He quickly walked to the round table in the middle of the hall and saluted to the old general. He quickly said, "The target has already headed to Luochio Airport. This is completely in line with the tactical deduction of the General Staff Headquarters." Old General Ambley held the scalding hot tea cup with both hands and nodded tiredly. From the tone of this subordinate, he knew that there must be more to it. But the specific situation is a little different. The Federation's command center sent an entire mechanical battalion to escort the concert team, but they are still in the same place. The one that left this time is only a single mech. The Norman officer used his fastest speed to turn on the hologram system on the table and brought up the previous image. He said hesitantly. Old General Ambley raised his head and looked at the blurry satellite image on the hologram table in front of him. In the image, on the road, nearly 100 Federation's heavy armored vehicles were silent and motionless. However, a black mech on a heavy truck was moving. He could vaguely see the hatch opening. The Imperial Expeditionary Forces must kill target. The beautiful Federation national girl was looking down and waving to the sky. Old General Ambley's cloudy eyes gradually revealed a trace of coldness. Only now did he realize that the Federal Army might have used the celebrity as bait. If this speculation was true, what kind of misfortune would befall the Empire's army? Just like how he didn't understand His Majesty's order to hunt down the Federation national girl, he also didn't understand why the Federal military dared to use such a bait. In fact, even the commanders of the Federal Army didn't understand the mystery behind this. This was a battle to the death between the Empire and the Federal Army. It was also a battle between the Federation's military god and the Empire's emperor. When fishing, if the fish is big enough, strong enough, and fast enough, it can eat the bait and swim away. Old General Ambley put down the teacup beside the chair and stood up. He looked at the electronic map and the image on the table and said calmly. He knew that his subordinates standing beside him, like him, had guessed the intentions of their counterparts in the Federation, but he didn't decide to give up, because this was His Majesty's will. Even if he knew that the Federation in the south had set up a trap, old General Ambley had no choice but to dive in headfirst. Not to mention, his troops had the ability and courage to do so. In order to not let us, the big fish, notice the problem, the fisherman was overconfident and cut the fishing line countless times thinner. If that's the case, let's eat the bait and cut the fishing line. I want to know, this pilot who dared to set foot on the road of escape alone, how arrogant is he, or is he a lunatic? The old general looked at the black mecha disappearing into the wilderness and smiled slightly. There was a hint of absolute confidence in his faint, mocking tone. He ordered, "Begin the second phase of the plan." The staff officers beside him were hesitant because they knew very well what kind of terrible losses the second phase of the plan would bring to the Empire's expeditionary army. However, in front of His Majesty's will and the General's order, they had nothing to say. They could only accept. Closely monitor the line from Route 7 to Luaccio Spaceport. Even if there are Federation troops there, I want to know how many people they can send. Add the backup brigade. We must ensure that when Moonwolf passes through that area, the Federation headquarters will be terrified of the Empire's attack and won't dare to send any troops to support them. The task of the frontline troops is to suppress and lead. No matter how many people the Federation buried there, we can't let them increase the number of people. After confirming that this might be a trap, old General Ambley only responded with a few simple orders. He leaned on the table and quietly looked at the colored dots on the electronic map. After a long moment of silence, he said in a deep voice, "Don't worry. Tell Love that in order for his mecha brigade to complete the mission given by His Majesty, at least 20,000 brave Empire soldiers will die on this planet tonight. If he can't kill the target, he should know what to do." Hearing this, the officers of the Empire felt a chill in their hearts. However, when they thought of the super strength of the Moonwolf group and Captain Love, they calmed down a little. Old General Ambley was about to leave the command center when suddenly his white eyebrows trembled slightly. He turned around and said to the staff officer, "Check in the database. I feel that the black mecha from before is a little strange. It's the Federation's newest model, Embark." One of the staff officers replied, "The model has been confirmed before, but there hasn't been more information, so the database can't provide the specific power and firepower parameters." Old General Ambley was silent for a moment. The slight discomfort in his heart grew stronger and stronger, but he didn't show it in front of his subordinates. He just waved his hand and said, "If that's the case, remember to ask Love to bring this MX back. This is a very important thing. Don't let that pilot self-destruct." The Imperial Expeditionary Army activated the second phase of the plan. The 17 armored regiments that were active in the southern hemisphere at night suddenly retracted their lines and gave up on the targets in front of them. They changed their attack routes and formed two arrowheads, charging towards two areas in the south. Although the 17 mecha divisions were extremely far away from each other, from their attack route, it was clear that they would arrive at the same area in the end. At the same time, the Imperial Expeditionary Force, which had been silently waiting behind the demarcation line, followed the scorched earth and pressed forward. At this point, except for the few troops left behind, the Maple Forest Alliance on Planet 5460 had pushed all of their attack forces to the southern hemisphere. Chapter 4:11. The dense array of cannons spewed out dazzling light. Over 1,000 high-speed cannons whistled through the sky every second and blasted toward the Imperial Iron Stream. The entire Earth was shaking. Such a dense amount of cannons had not appeared in this part of the universe for more than a decade. Tonight, it was suddenly unleashed in the belly of the planet. It made people tremble uncontrollably. The heavy armored vehicle charging at the front was hit by a dozen cannons in succession and exploded with a boom. The Imperial mecha hiding behind the chariot charged valiantly forward like a phantom. However, the air all around them was filled with high-speed spinning armor-piercing shrapnel like a torrential downpour. Even the highly mobile Night Wolf mecha had no way of displaying its mobility in front of such terrifying defensive firepower. It only managed to hold out for 3 more seconds before it was reduced to a pile of scrap metal. Boom, 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 boom. In the following bombardment, the Night Wolf mecha was hit until sparks flew everywhere and its limbs were shattered. The empty hills were filled with sharp and terrifying screams. The Federation's defensive positions opened fire. The night sky was filled with fire and smoke, covering the sky and earth. Gradually, the smoke fell on the Imperial chariots and the corpses of the soldiers. However, before they could settle down, they were shaken up by even more violent explosions. However, in the thick smoke, the black hibiscus flag representing the Imperial royal family continued to flutter. Although the flag was already a bit old from the smoke, it still rolled in the wind. Facing the cannon fire, it coldly and silently moved forward. Another wave of group armor attacks. The Imperial army did not stop for a single step or breath. They completely ignored the chariot mecha that continuously turned into smoke and silently sent off their fallen comrades. Almost crazily, they charged toward the Federation's third line of defense. The situation on the battlefield was like a giant white wave in the dark sea. In the night of wild winds, it continuously slammed against the reefs of the coastline. The reefs looked incomparably sturdy, but the giant wave had no intention of retreating at all. It did not care that it would be smashed into pieces. The wave behind followed closely behind the wave, vowing to smash those black reefs into painful powder. On the annular belt of Planet 5460, there were more than a dozen scenes like this. The 17 armored regiments of the Imperial Expeditionary Force's Maple Forest Brigade were like 17 devils carrying black spears as they tried to pierce through the thickest defense line of the Federation. In a large-scale battle on the surface of a planet, the 17 armor clans seemed to be fighting from thousands of miles away, but in reality, they were all vaguely connected. The main direction of the Imperial armies' attack was quietly moving in 2 different directions amidst the seemingly crazy and unreasonable attacks. The 17 black spears were about to become 2 giant arrows that could not be blocked. The Federation's defensive line, which had just stabilized, began to wobble in the face of this wave of attack. Although the damage to the fleet in the sky was not great, they had to take off and land wave after wave to replenish their energy and ammunition. In the permanent fortifications on the ground, 23% of the main cannons had already been declared useless due to overuse. Even the high-density cannons, which had cost a lot of money, were about to enter a stage of energy instability because they had to continuously defend against the Imperial iron flow. There were even a few locations where the high-density cannons had already started to sound alarms. The officers of the Federation looked at the reckless Imperial iron flow on the holographic screen in anger and disbelief. Apart from being shocked, they were also endlessly puzzled. Why would the Imperial military attack at all costs? Under the attack of the Federation's three-dimensional defense system, they had to pay an incomparably terrible price for every step they took, but they were still attacking. Attacking without stopping. This kind of crazy attack was bound to bring about serious losses. Although the Federal Central Computer had not yet produced an evaluation report of the Imperial military's losses, just by looking at it, the frontline commander could confirm that at least 1/6 of the Imperial Maple Forest Brigade's combat strength had been lost in an instant just like that. With the Federation's powerful defense system and advanced firepower arrangement, according to the current speed of the Maple Forest Brigade's loss, even if they were allowed to fight their way to the headquarters base, how many of them would be able to survive? The target of the Imperial Maple Forest Brigade was the Federation's Planetary War Zone headquarters. They shouted, "Long live His Majesty," and charged coldly toward death. In the end, they fell one after another and were buried in this faraway foreign land that was countless light-years away from their homeland. The soldiers of the Empire would not equate stupidity with heroism. However, in order to complete His Majesty's mission, in order to fulfill the strategic objectives of the headquarters, from the most basic squad to the heavy-duty Moon Wolf mechas that attracted the attention of countless people, no one took a step back. In fact, they even thought for a second longer. If the four-layered three-dimensional defense system that the federal military had spent many years building was like a giant steel curtain that encompassed everything from the black grassland to the vast sky in the southern hemisphere, then the crazy and reckless group attack of the Imperial Maple Forest Brigade was like two fists at this moment, an indestructible cannon fire giant fist. Looking at the density of the cannon fire in the wilderness and the firm determination of the Imperial Iron Stream charge, there was no doubt that old General Ambly in the Northern Hemisphere base would rather let these two fists completely destroy him in order to tear a hole in this steel curtain. The Maple Forest Brigade, who had been attacking from all directions, had already retracted their fingers into fists. The 17 armored regiments had become alloy fists with enormous strength. They fiercely smashed toward the Federation's defensive position, wanting to smash through the opponent and then smash toward the opponent's vital points. The 10 armored regiments were the right fist of the Imperial Maple Forest Brigade. They sharply and wildly smashed toward the Federation's headquarters in the northeast of the planet's night zone. The remaining 7 regiments attacked the southwest, encircling and attacking. They fiercely smashed their fists toward the most important military base in the southern hemisphere. For the Federal Army, regardless of whether it was the headquarters or the military base, they were both absolutely important places that they had to defend. The headquarters was the brain of the Army, while the military base was the heart of the Federal Army, providing them with an unending supply of nourishment. No matter what the initial design of the Federal military was, and no matter whether or not Lieutenant General Narson could see through the military plan of the old general of the Imperium, the Federation had to adjust its defense strategy immediately in the face of the two violent, unreasonable, blood-stained fists that still contained terrifying power. It was necessary for the Federation to defend itself immediately and block the enemy's incessant attack. The Federation's soldiers stepped on the corpses of their comrades. Countless pairs of scarlet eyes stared and loudly shouted. In the end, they didn't let the Empire's people break through in an instant. The steel curtain in the southern hemisphere, under the bitter resistance of the Federal Army, barely held on. However, near the equator, this steel curtain had already begun to distort and deform, revealing its weakest areas. At this moment, the Maple Forest Alliance's fully mechanized brigade, which was the last to enter the battlefield, fiercely charged towards the deformed steel curtain. The 17 armored divisions in charge of the fierce frontal assault were already bloody fists. The 30,000 Imperial Brigade was like a wolf's mouth. At this moment, they had already bared their ferocious white fangs and were about to take a bite. The direction of the wolf fang was the flat mountainous area between Anshio Airport and Luochio Airport. Old General Ambly held his teacup and calmly looked at the military intelligence report on the electronic map. After confirming that the Wolf Fang Brigade had entered the designated area, he took a deep breath. A trace of blood appeared on his slightly tired face. What should be done had been done. The rest was up to fate. The old general slightly bent his body and waved his hand to refuse the service officer to follow him. He silently walked out of the command hall, took the elevator, and came to the highest point of the circular base. Facing the cold wind of the northern hemisphere, he looked at the faint light of the southern hemisphere on the other side of the forest. The people of the Southern Federation definitely didn't expect him to be this crazy. "You want to fish, but I'm going to break your fishing rod," old General Ambly silently thought, but he knew that in the West Woods in this Federation land, even if they could achieve some success tonight, as long as the Empire couldn't break through the Night Scorpion Nebula and Gary Corridor, the Expeditionary Army's only path back was death. A few months ago, when the Federation began to send more troops, the old general had already guessed what the Federal military, or rather the Federation's military god, was going to do. The Federation was going to start a war. Naturally, the first thing they wanted to do was to get rid of these unwelcome guests who came from afar. The Expeditionary Army's end would eventually come. The only reason they were able to hold on for a few decades was because the Empire's most deep-seated enemy had always kept the Expeditionary Army alive. Old General Ambly knew this better than the Federation's Ministry of Defense. They had been away from their homeland for more than a decade, and there was no way back. Now that they had received His Majesty's random order, they might as well go crazy. At the very least, they had to make the Federation pay a heavy price. Yes, tonight, the ferocious attack of the Empire's Maple Forest Alliance could only be described as crazy. Although everyone in the universe knew about the bravery of the Empire's soldiers, the intensity of tonight's battle was still far beyond the expectations of the Federal military. If the Southern Hemisphere was a trap, then the Imperial Expeditionary Force had used the craziest and bloodiest method to forcefully turn this situation into a chaotic situation. The Federation military had planned for this a long time ago, but they still suffered an incomparably heavy blow at the start of the war. It was precisely because they simply couldn't grasp the supreme commander of this regiment or even the harshness and viciousness of this expeditionary army that was all alone in a foreign land. His Majesty had given a random order, and the expeditionary force fought a crazy battle. The terror and craziness made the Federal Army in the Southern Hemisphere feel as if they were struck by lightning. They looked around and felt gloomy. A relieved smile appeared on Ambly's old face. He let go of his fingers and let the teacup that had accompanied him for many years fall off the high wall of the base. He couldn't hear the shattering sound in the dark night, but he still listened. It seemed that he could only hear the mournful cries of the young people in the Southern Hemisphere as they died. Like jade that is willing to break, but no longer willing to hide in the glacier. The old general looked to the south and murmured softly, "I can't take you back to your homeland alive, so I'll take your souls and the failure of the Federation." High-speed fighter jets swept past at low altitude. The dense cannons plowed a terrifying trail of deep gravel in the wilderness. The black MX was like a beast in the dark night. It moved quickly through the smoke and dust at an extremely high speed. The missiles fired by the 7 fighter jets at low altitude couldn't hit the strange trembling body of the mech, but they effectively slowed it down. With an extremely beautiful left turn, the black mech dodged a missile. It left a trail of afterimages in the wilderness as it sped toward a mountain range in front of it. Chapter 412. The air supremacy near Zaichio spaceport was still being contested, but when he received the signal from the Maple Forest Alliance base in the Northern Hemisphere, The blonde Night Wolf Fleet Commander Fu Ding did not hesitate to order 10 high-speed omnidomain cruising fighter jets to speed towards the northeast. He did not care about the loss of ground attack power at all. The target of the fighter jets was a black mecha racing through the wilderness. This mecha was the source of the Empire military's operation this time. In the dimly lit cockpit, the smell of heavy oxygen released by the life support system was very clear. Su Li's left hand gripped the control stick tightly while the fingers of his right hand quickly swept across the touchscreen. In an instant, he entered 14 commands to control the Black MX to perform one dangerous yet beautiful standard evasive maneuver after another amidst the smoke and rain of bullet. The Empire's fighter jets in the night sky above his head were reflected in his eyes through the mecha's SCC system and large radius high-sensitivity radar in the helmet. When they had brushed past the northern area of Zaichio spaceport earlier, these Empire's fighter jets had followed them and had been unable to shake them off. This fact made him very clear that the Empire's orbit-changing satellites were still watching him from outer space. The black box was fixed to the back of the cockpit, while Jian Shuer sat quietly beside him. It was not designed to be a two-person mecha, so the cockpit was slightly cramped. However, being chased by the Empire's fighter jets the entire way, the two of them were not in the mood to experience the stuffiness and cramping of the cockpit. Sulu was not nervous at all. He only felt that it was a little troublesome. The fighter jets in the sky did not carry electromagnetic beam bombs, so it was basically impossible for them to hurt the extremely mobile MX. However, being chased like this by the enemy made him feel as if someone was holding a gleaming dagger behind him, ready to stab him at any moment. It made him feel unusually anxious. A sharp alarm came from the radar. Su Li's fingers entered commands as fast as lightning. With a push of the control stick with his left hand, the heavy black mecha was like an extremely nimble toy under his control. On the simple dirt path that was approaching the mountain, the mecha's thick mechanical legs suddenly sprang up and swept diagonally to the right, breaking a thin tree in half. With a whoosh, a heat sensor rocket fell from the sky. Just as the Black MX mecha dove into the forest, it struck the already broken thin tree. Amidst the explosion, the mountain rocks cracked and soil poured down in torrent. Very troublesome, Su Lu thought silently in his heart. However, he still didn't want to use the simulation system. It wasn't because Jian Shuer was sitting right beside him. It was because the military needed his mecha to be the bait. Then, in this escape plan, they couldn't just aim to escape to Luochao Airport. The real danger was hidden in the simulation of this battle. Right at this moment, a sharp whistle rang out in the skies. A silver-white shadow rushed out from the faint clouds in the skies to the west, flying past the black mecha's head and towards the rear at high speed. The mecha's friend or foe identification system instantly determined that this was a fighter from the Federation. The Black MX mech advanced at high speed without turning back. The radar transmitted the scene behind it to the holographic screen of the cockpit. Several blinding lights flashed across the night sky. It should be the large-caliber cannons firing. The Federation's fighter jet that came to support deftly lifted its angle in the air and instantly shot down the Empire's fighter jet that had been following behind Su Lu the whole time. On the holographic screen, the Empire fighter fell to the ground with green smoke billowing out of it. The Federation fighter flapped its wings slightly in greeting to the mecha on the ground. A grateful smile appeared on Su Li's face. His finger tapped the touch screen. The black mecha that was running at high speed gave a thumbs up to the night sky where the aerial battle had just occurred. However, the next moment, in the night sky behind the mecha, a few more Empire mecha joined the fray. Although the Federation mecha that had come to provide support valiantly destroyed one of the Empire mecha, it was ultimately outnumbered and turned into a firework in the night sky. The smile on Su Li's face instantly disappeared. He narrowed his eyes and continued to operate in silence. Like the Empire Fleet Commander, the air combat forces of the Federation Zaichio spaceport, although they were also in the midst of a dangerous offensive and defensive battle, still sent out more than 10 fighters to cover the Black Mecha's escape. Both sides knew very well who was inside this Black Mecha and what its significance was. With the valiant cover of the Federation fighters, the Black MX mech finally shook off the pursuit and harassment of the Empire from the air. It turned into a black stream of fire, passing through the primeval forest and stepping over the Black Plains, heading towards the spaceport in the distance at high speed. There was a simple military road in the middle of the plains. The Black Mecha broke out of the forest and sprinted across the grass. The moment its heavy body landed on the surface of the road, it began to change its state. The thick alloy mechanical legs flipped over and closed together with the sound of hydraulic compression and motors. The side armor automatically pushed out a caterpillar mechanism, and the spherical joints turned into power linkage equipment. A loud grinding sound rang out on the road. The Black Mecha instantly entered full-speed movement mode. The caterpillar tracks rotated at high speed under the power of the powerful engine, tearing apart the shallow layer of hard concrete on the surface of the road. It carried with it a cloud of dust as it moved forward into the night. The Black Mecha's mode changes were all completed at high speed, without the slightest hint of deceleration. There was a palpitating sense of simplicity and beauty in its movements. The lighting in the cockpit was dim. Sulu operated in silence, his fingers continuously entering commands and activating buttons. Although each of his actions did not appear to be fast, when put together, there was a fairly clear sense of rhythm. No matter how difficult the operation was, he showed no signs of panic. Jian Shuer checked the high-strength laces on her body, using a smile to hide the nervousness in her heart. She reflexively turned to look at him. The two of them were sitting very close to each other. Although the lighting in the cockpit was dim, she could clearly see this man's thick, knife-like eyebrows and that pair of permanently narrowed eyes when she turned her head. The Empire's offensive is fierce. The third line of defense is having a hard time holding on. But you don't have to worry. As long as the fighters behind us can't catch up, at least on this road to Luoqiu, our mecha will be safe. Sulu took off his helmet and calmed the slight feeling in his heart. He said in a low voice, "Both the Empire and the Federation have made the wrong judgment. If we go full speed ahead, I can guarantee that before the Empire breaks into this area, we will be able to send you to Luoqiu spaceport." He was the designer of the MX. He knew the functions of this Black Mecha better than the staff officers of the Federation's Department of Defense. Especially after discovering the small note under the right touchscreen, he had infinite confidence in this Black MX. But you and I both know that our mecha is bait. So, I'm sorry. I can't go full speed ahead. You will have to continue taking risks with me. The Federal Central Computer, which was that old thing, was connected directly to Su Li's brain. He could even know everything that was happening on this planet faster than the Federation's frontline command. Although he couldn't completely understand the entire battle situation on this planet, he could at least calculate some of the problems. At least we don't have to worry about anything now. He pointed at the map on the screen and explained to Jian Shuer, "We will arrive at the front line of Huangshanling Lonely Ridge in about 4 hours. In these 4 hours we will be safe." Okay. Jian Shuer nodded. She was very obedient and didn't say anything. She didn't want to disturb his operation. Ever since she had received the military's request, this national girl knew that her frontline concert tour would definitely be a journey filled with unknown dangers. Right now, she was running with Su Lu alone on the road of escape. Naturally, she was nervous. But for some reason, seeing Su Li's silent and precise operation, her hard-to-suppress nervousness gradually calmed down. In order to conserve energy, after entering full speed mode, Su Lu had shut down some unnecessary functions of the mecha's life support system. The temperature in the cockpit was gradually rising, and the dim lighting seemed to contain an endless sense of dryness. The straps can be undone. We will be safe for more than 3 hours. You can trust in my judgment. The sweat on his body had soaked his clothes. Su Lu felt a little uncomfortable, especially with the girl's body pressed tightly against him. The feeling was slightly awkward. Jian Shuer grunted and obediently undid the straps. She didn't ask where his confidence in her safety came from. She took off the black summer jacket that Su Lu had draped over her. Raising her arm, she wiped the sweat off her face. Because of the heat, her cheeks were flushed red. The cockpit fell silent once more. Only the low rumble of the mecha's twin engines and the occasional rise and fall of the tracks against the ground could be heard. Say something. Su Lu cautiously observed the darkness around them through the automatic monitoring system. The road is still long. Jian Shuer smiled somewhat helplessly. She cupped her burning face with both hands and gently pulled back her legs. That military uniform skirt of hers was pushed up by this movement, revealing the girl's tight, smooth thighs. I'm a little nervous. The girl lowered her head and said, I don't know what to say. This is the first time I've seen a real battlefield and seen dead people. I'm very nervous too. Su Lu pressed a button, allowing the MX mecha to enter a semi-automatic state. With some difficulty, he turned around and took out that black box. Lowering his head, he opened it and said, Although I've seen many dead people before, this is also my first time on a battlefield. In the process of taking out the box, his body inevitably rubbed against Jian Shuer's body. That clear sliver of softness made him feel slightly flustered. If it had been a normal member of the opposite sex, perhaps he would have been able to keep his mind clear, but this was Jian Shuer. She had been his dream lover since he was young. Moreover, at the concert earlier, he had even seen such a playful and sexy side of her. Jian Shuer didn't seem to notice these problems. Fanning herself lightly with her small hands, she said in reminiscence, I've sat in a mecha before. That was a few years ago. When Li Feng was first allowed to operate a mecha, he took me in at once. She glanced at Su Li's well-defined profile, and a trace of a warm smile flashed through her bright, limpid eyes. But his piloting was very shaky. It wasn't as comfortable as yours. MX's performance is much better. Su Lu was silent for a moment before saying, and this isn't a river of cars. Chapter 413. The entire journey was silent. The beautiful girl leaned against his arm obediently. The reverberations of the road were clearly transmitted into his mind. The straight road continued forward, but unfortunately, there were no lights, no compound-powered racing cars, only a lonely black mecha. So this was not a sightseeing tour. There was no music playing in the silent cockpit, but the humming of the engine, the soft sound of the hydraulic system, and the low and clear vibration of the metal components were like a song with a strong heavy metal style, lingering in the ears of the young man and woman. From the corner of his eye, Su Lu saw the faint disappointment on Jian Shuer's beautiful face. He subconsciously lowered his voice and explained, This is a military mission. You are only a civilian, but you are willing to take the risk to be the bait. You are already very brave. Jian Shuer adjusted her sitting position and leaned against his shoulder shyly. After a moment of silence, she said softly, I have a military position. I am studying in the Warship Command faculty of the First Academy. Su Lu was slightly taken aback. He immediately remembered that quiet afternoon 2 years ago when this national girl seemed to have been doing a set of test papers filled with structural diagrams. Perhaps that was the entrance exam for the First Military Academy? The niece of the war god Li Pifu. Having studied in the First Military Academy, it was not surprising that she had a military identity. Since that was the case, it was only natural that she cooperated with the military. However, there was one question that had always puzzled him. Why did the Ministry of Defense let you be the bait? Why did the people of the Empire attack the South like crazy when they saw you appear on this planet? I once wondered if it was because that old man killed the previous emperor of the empire. They have always wanted revenge but could not find the opportunity, so they vented their anger on you. But even in the Federation, not many people know about your relationship with Feiqing, and this matter does not make sense. Su Li's finger moved the micro button, and a crisp sound rang out in the cockpit of the mecha. Whether it was studying in the university or doing other things, he was always used to silently watching and digesting the information. He rarely asked questions in rapid succession like this. Jian Shuer frowned slightly and moved her body with difficulty. Her face was full of confusion. I don't know the reason, but since the Ministry of National Defense came up with this plan, I believe they must have their reasons. She turned her head to look at Su Li's side profile and asked, I didn't ask you before we left. Actually, I also have a big question. According to the plan of the Ministry of Defense, we should be moving together with the mechanical division. Perhaps our speed will be slower, but if the Empire can really tear through the defense line, this mechanical division and your Group 7 can at least cover you for a period of time. Until the last moment when you can't hold on anymore, then you can send me to Luoqiu. Why did you go against the orders of the Ministry of Defense and take me away alone? You and I don't know where the military's confidence in this plan comes from, but since those big shots are so confident, I'm sure they'll come for you regardless of whether the Imperial Expeditionary Force can see through this trap or not. Su Lu said, In that case, of course I won't go with the battalion. There will always be deaths in war, but it's always better to have fewer deaths. Jian Shuer's long eyelashes fluttered slightly, and she was silent. After confirming the real reason behind Su Li's decision, the girl felt a faint sense of respect and admiration. For Su Lu, this was a very simple logical problem, but for many people, it was often inconceivable. The Federation fighter that was covering our escape was hit by the Empire. I don't know if the pilot had the chance to jump, but I think he's probably dead. Su Lu narrowed his eyes and looked at the enlarged electronic map on the screen. He said softly, I've signed a contract with you on behalf of the Whitewater Company. I owe you a life. Your uncle's daughter. No matter how you look at it, I have the obligation to protect you with my life. But those Federation soldiers who don't know the inside story don't have such an obligation. Understood. Jian Shuer rubbed her slightly red cheeks, and her eyes lit up slightly. Looking at Su Li's side profile, she smiled sweetly and said, Then I'll leave my safety to you. You're welcome. A sincere smile appeared on Su Li's face, and he said, Since the Great War God has entrusted this mission to me without worry, he naturally believes that on planet 5460 tonight, only I can guarantee your safety. I couldn't tell that you were such a confident person normally, murmured Jian Shuer, gazing at him thoughtfully. Everyone has their own area of expertise. For me, the MX Mecha is my world. As long as I sit in the mecha, I don't know why, but I feel confident to the point of even being a little arrogant, said Su Lu to the girl beside him as he listened to the ultrasonic waves in front of them through the monitoring equipment. This was his first time on a real battlefield, but whether it was the cruel and heroic scenes of the northern battlefields transmitted by the old thing or this long and dangerous journey, none of it could disturb his calm. There was no excitement or panic in his heart, only a natural sense of familiarity with the battlefield. Li Feng also said something similar. It seems that although the two of you are polar opposites in personality, you are very similar in some aspects. Jian Shuer smiled sweetly, her eyes narrowed in an extremely cute manner. She said, I know you designed the MX, so I'm very curious about what was written on that piece of paper. The paper is some correction parameters. Although there were hints in the system, that engineer who made the adjustments still habitually used paper to tell me these things. Su Lu thought of that genius girl far away on the capital ring, and said with a smile, The MX mecha we're sitting in has already had most of its long-range firepower systems removed, and the synchronization speed of the central control system has also been slightly adjusted. This is more suitable for me to perform. Him or her? Her name is Shang Qiu, the first-level technical supervisor of Nutshell, one of the true designers of the MX. Jian Shuer used her thin index finger to brush away the slightly wet purple strands of hair beside her face. Looking at Su Lu with a chuckle, she asked with a hint of innocence, "Shang Qiu, what's your relationship with her?" A pure relationship between a man and a woman?" Su Lu also narrowed his eyes as he replied with a smile. Perhaps it was the smell of smoke on this planet, or perhaps it was the dry and hot air in the cockpit of the mecha, or perhaps it was the flames of war, death, and escape he had seen along the way, but this Donglin rock suddenly found a trace of his youthful playfulness. He even dared to make such a joke in front of the woman of his dreams. However, this kind of joke was not very interesting. Jian Shuer rubbed her nose in boredom, but immediately after, because of a sudden collision between the tracks of the mecha and a protrusion on the road, she jumped up. She subconsciously let out a soft cry as she grabbed tightly onto Su Li's arm. Throughout the night, the black mecha ran silently in the night wind. The journey was peaceful, but this planet was already filled with the sorrow of death. The young man and woman in the mecha did not want to recall the Federation mecha that had crashed into the plains, did not want to think about how many people were dying at this time, so they could only force themselves to be calm and chat. However, the sorrow of death was ultimately the starting point of panic, and the woman's panic was the source of the man's pity. "Don't be afraid. You really don't have to be afraid, I'm here," he once again forcefully repeated. Su Lu felt the delicate skin and soft body of the girl beside him, but there was no desire in his heart. Just like what Uncle had taught him in the past, a normal young man who had given most of his youth to his hands would find it difficult to be lustful whenever he saw a girl he truly liked. The black MX mecha ran silently towards the northeast direction. When it was about to enter the mountainous area west of Luoqiu spaceport, he suddenly pulled on the control stick and the mecha instantly entered a static state. Looking at the latest battle situation and the detection results of this mountainous area sent by the Federal Central Computer in his left eye, Su Li's thick, knife-like eyebrows raised. His pupils shrank, and he said to Jian Shuer beside him, "Tie yourself up tighter." Jian Shuer was slightly stunned. Using the back of her hand to wipe away the sweat on her cheeks, she earnestly followed his instructions and carefully tied the straps around her body. She used a lot of strength to tie the straps around her body. Through the dark military uniform and short skirt, the straps slightly sank into the girl's soft body. In this dangerous and tense moment, the seductive atmosphere in the cockpit became even more intense. Su Lu quickly took off his clothes, revealing his well-proportioned and strong naked body. Forcing himself not to look at Jian Shuer's shocked expression, he shamelessly took out the simulation system from the box and silently started to install it. Although she was sure that the boy beside her wasn't a pervert who would take advantage of the situation, Jian Shuer couldn't help but exclaim softly when she suddenly saw him naked. She covered her eyes with her hands tightly. Her cheeks, which were originally slightly red, were now as red as an apple in autumn, glowing red and glistening. It was unknown when, but the two pairs of hands that were covering their faces had revealed a sliver of space. Occasionally, a trace of curiosity could be seen, and their eyes were filled with curiosity. Su Lu didn't know that the nation's girl beside him was peeping. Only now did he remember the problem with the simulation system. He didn't have time to deal with it, so he was too embarrassed to turn around. "It's done," he said in a low voice. "Enhanced mobile platform." Jian Shuer stared in shock at the system on Su Li's body, covering her mouth in disbelief as she exclaimed. Her voice was very soft. Su Lu was in the midst of his final preparations for the mecha battle, so he didn't hear her clearly. "If you can hold on, don't use the life support system helmet." Su Lu narrowed his eyes at the display on the holographic screen and said in a serious tone, "Later on, the tumbling will be very bad. You might vomit, and it might clog up the helmet. Jian Shuer put down the hand she had been using to cover her mouth and nodded blankly. Only then did the orders from the Federation Command Center ring out in the Mecca. Change of plan. Lieutenant Colonel Su Lu. The Charter has just confirmed that the Empire's Maple Forest Alliance's Moonwolf Group has broken through the defense line and infiltrated Qinggong Ridge. Command Center orders you to take Miss Jian Shuer and immediately retreat to the southwest direction. Su Lu was silent for a moment, then abnormally cut off the communication. Under Jian Shuer's shocked gaze, he took a deep breath, his face slightly pale, and put on the helmet. In the vision of the helmet was the valley behind them. In the darkness of the night, the valley seemed abnormally quiet, but the faint sound of drums could be heard from behind the valley. War drums. It wasn't war drums, it was heavy mecha advancing at high speed. The high frequency of the alloy mecha and the rocky ground seemed to be beating on the hearts of the young man and woman. A black and green Empire mecha suddenly appeared at the mouth of the valley. The next moment, countless black and green Empire mechas surged out of the valley. You're tuning in to the Phoenix Knights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.